frame myself better. Hold on. Okay. That was fucking no, that's not what I wanted.
This podcast could use a little bit less Jake crotch, I'm going to be honest with you.
Oh, you son of a bitch! You bastard! Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new podcast, a new show, a new era, even. And today, it's all about friendship. I am here with my co host, Jen, and because Jams and Tea's a bit in the rear view now, I'm bringing something new to the table. We're starting something brand new here. Welcome to, I guess you could call it our bizarre adventure. Hmm? And if you've ever wondered why what I need more competitive podcasts in my life. I need more podcasts where the co-hosts are trying to in some respects destroy one another, but also friendship is about highs and lows. We want to build each other up as much as we want to tear each other down. So Jen, I'm going to toss it over to you. Why don't you talk about our little setup and what we've got going on here today and in this near future? What we're going to be doing here on this little show?
So I want to go ahead and give a shout out to the lovely, lovely, lovely podcast Versus Wolves that is more or less inspiring a lot of what we're trying to do with the format here, which
Mm-hmm.
is that Jake and I have gotten a lot more comfortable podcasting together. And so, of course, I wake up one morning to a whole screen of text from Jake that they sent to me at 4 in the morning, normal occasion, except this time it was a pitch for a new show. And I said, great, as long as we don't have to kill Jen and Jake talk, which we're not. We'll save that for when it's appropriate to do. We're gonna do this thing. And here's how it's going to work. This is going to be more or less a competition in how well we know each other via how well we are able to recommend things to one another that will both elate and infuriate us. So, how this will happen is sometimes we might have an exhibition round where we will specifically be talking about new albums. We're going to be doing that today. I'll introduce those in a bit. But the main event is going to be a showdown of taste making and recommendation between the two of us of per se, if it's my turn to do a certain thing a certain way, I will throw something at Jake that Jake has never seen that I think Jake will really, really like, and Jake will throw something back at me that they think I might really, really hate. And we're going to do it kind of that way. Now, to kick this off, we'll call it a pacifist round where we're both doing things that we think we will each very much enjoy as a way to give this kind of a light start. Now, our next episode will not follow that format, but we're going to get there. How the rules are going to work is that we're going to present our segments like we would a normal collaborative review. Obviously, the person who recommended it will be taking the lead a little bit, but it will be a dialogue both ways on both chosen texts. And this can be anything, right? It doesn't have to be anything contemporary. It can be anything from any time period. We are doing two movies today, but we have made it very clear to each other that we're willing to mix and match things like format, medium, genre, etc., so long as we are continuing the kind of head to head angle of this. Now, we are going to end each segment of the main event by grading the chosen work on a scale of 1 to 5, and those will be our points. And as we go through episodes, we will count the points that each person has earned from their competitor to see how aligned our spirit of recommendation has been. And this 1 to 5 scale applies the same way to good things as to bad things, where a 5 on a bad is most bad, and a 5 on a good thing is most good, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want to piss each other off just as much as we want to share things that we think we will love.
Basically, and like Jen said, it's kind of happening regardless of medium, just because we're two people who we don't particularly limit ourselves when it comes to the consumption of various artistic mediums. So one week we could be recommending the other person a book, and they could be recommending a video game. Who fucking knows? Like we have no clue. And in terms of how often you might want to expect this, we're probably going to take about 2 weeks in between each episode, give each other enough time to experience the requisite amount of whatever it is that we're recommending to each other. We will try to respect each other's time, but if we have something longer in the works, we can designate a specific amount of something that we can watch or play or whatever until we have enough to talk about in the next episode. So there's that. We haven't fully decided how the point system is going to play out in terms of what the consequences and benefits of victory and loss end up being, but we'll get there when we get there. What's important is that we just want to share some shit with each other. We want to bring forward conversations about things that we feel the most passionate about. Just because I remember when, like, it got to a point, specifically with the last podcast, where at some weeks we were just like, oh, we should talk about this new thing coming out. And like, all of us would be completely indifferent on what we were talking about, and it was like, oh, how do we stretch ourselves for a topic? Whereas if we're recommending these things to the other person, by default one of us is going to have super strong feelings on what we're doing. But that said, we're not always going to be, shooting for the moon and or stars. Like, we're not necessarily going to be like, oh, this is the worst thing ever every single week, or this is the best thing ever. Just things that will create an enriching discussion. And normally, I think once we get past this preliminary round showcasing what the format's going to be, we're just going to be able to have an introductory segment where we kind of talk about whatever we've been playing, listening to that doesn't have to do with the podcast. We can just rattle it off here. And because we built this channel basically entirely on music criticism, we're not going to abandon that either, as you will see today. But this is gonna be something. We've had this cooking for a little while, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
All right, so I'll present the cards before I let Jake begin our exhibition round because Jake has the first segment. But today on the docket, we have in our exhibition rounds first the new Deafheaven album, Lonely People with Power. And second, the new album from Jane Remover, Revenge Seekers. Then, the main events. We've hit a hot streak of talking about vampire movies.
I love that video that we recorded in November of last year. I released so conveniently like hinges at the very end of us being like, oh yeah, that new Ryan Coogler movie's gonna come out next year. That's we should really talk about that. It was like, maybe all the stars just finally aligned here. That me being a procrastinator was actually a good thing.
So, my pick for the main event is the 1970s vampire film Ganja and Hess. And
Which you
Jake's
might
pick.
know about from us talking about clipping earlier this year, where Jen dropped a sample choice on me, where I was like, huh, that sounds interesting.
And Jake's pick, the thing that really got this idea going, is Ryan Coogler's new film Sinners, which will be the last thing that we talk about. But Jake, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? What the hell is Lonely People with Power, the new album from Deafheaven? Why is it your pick from this week? What's resonating with you?
Well, this year for music so far, it's been a little difficult just keeping up with everything, just because, again, when you don't have a weekly podcast focused on covering basically every notable music release coming out, it becomes a little bit more difficult to keep track of all that shit. So I've been sort of in the last month, like condensing all the music listening that I missed out on in the first like 3 months of this year into a couple of weeks. And so I'm going through all the new shit, and naturally, I know that Deafheaven have a new album. And we covered Deafheaven twice on this channel before. We covered their new their new album. In 2021, their new album came out, and then we also talked about Sunbather for its 10th anniversary, something like that. But people will know if you have been viewing for a while that Deafheaven are a pretty big sort of fixture in this podcast's history. We're all really, really big fans of that band. And not to mention, we even like releases from the band that are typically thought of as lesser by most people, we will totally go to bat for. And like, I thought like the last time we discussed them, it was just like, damn, it really does kind of suck that this band that I really love, that has a really great discography, that they're kind of living in the shadow of the success of Sunbather, and it feels like they're never going to quite recapture that sort of critical and audience adulation that even though they were kind of controversial because they were a newer kind of black gaze band back when that wasn't as popular, so all the true cult metal kids were like, this doesn't sound like it was recorded by a toaster. I hate it. And it also leans more into the emo sensibilities of like George Clark's writing and all of that stuff. But needless to say, Sunbather, one of my favorite metal albums, and basically every other album after that, I would put in not quite the same pantheon, but at least close to it in terms of greatness. And Deafheaven are a band where you never really know exactly what you're getting, where even the releases that are the most Deafheaven-y, like, you have an album like the one before last where, they basically interpolate a Jimmy Eat World song on one of the riffs. Like it's basically the riff from the middle, except it's, in a black gaze song, so it's awesome. There are thrash elements in some of their music. There are more shoegazy stuff, like on that last record. And so naturally, while I'm always going to hotly anticipate a new Deafheaven record, there's always a little part of me that's like, I hope that this one really lands with people because it feels like with every album they kind of lose a large swath of fans. Which is why it was super awesome that Lonely People with Power seemed to be a huge hit immediately. Like, immediately. I was so ready for this to be another, lukewarmly received, and I like it, but most people, eh. And, it's like, that's fine. Super understandable. I get it. That said, I saw this album cover and I was like, we're doing that like photograph thing. It really are we gonna be in our emo shit? Because it feels like we're gonna be in our emo shit, and I am happy to report that as ever, we are indeed fucking with that emo shit because Lonely People with Power continues George Clark's acumen for writing this really kind of prosaic, really emotional kind of bleeding heart in front of you. This is what's happening right now, and this is how I feel. But, like, filtered through very flowery prose that is delivered by a lot of fucking screaming. And this is a this is a behemoth of a record. This is a 62-minute long album. It's structured in a very similar way to an album like Sunbather, so it's not a surprise to me that this is kind of the one that seems to be winning a lot of people back. But honestly, the long and short of it is that I just think this is fucking outstanding. I think it's probably my album of the year as of right now. Actually, I'll split the difference between that and another album that we're gonna talk about next. But this record to me is the most well put together Deafheaven album in a while in terms of structure. It very cleanly divides itself into segments, which processing each leg of the album, I feel like is very integral to how I experience it. And it has like a really nice flow to it, but it also like, yes, it's building upon that sort of classic Deafheaven black gazy sound, but also this remembers that this band also fucking just rip shit when they really want to. I'm thinking about stuff on songs like the third track on here, Magnolia, that breaks out some of the nastiest, filthiest fucking metal riffs I've heard in a good while that are not very, spacey or exploratory or about space or whatever. No, this shit just fucking hits. And I think that in a lot of respects, it reminds me of an album we got last year from one of my favorite black gaze bands and one of my favorite bands in general, the French black metal band Alcé, where they basically come in with a huge album that is kind of a retrospective on their own career. And I feel like each leg of this album distinctly explores one of Deafheaven's previous facets. And I'm not always super into the idea of albums that are, I guess, kind of navel gazy in that kind of way. You have to really nail that vibe for me to really get along with what you're doing. And I really think that they nail it here, mainly because Deafheaven are a band that this kind of, I guess, this direction of combining everything together, it's showing you how versatile they have been, but also how, you know, there's still a lot of uniformity to their sound. This is a exhausting album to some extent just because of that runtime, and like again, a lot of these songs like run upwards of like 5 to 8 minutes, and it's punishing. Like you might need to take a break sometimes when listening to this thing, particularly if you're digesting the lyrics, but to be honest with you, man, I really think this is their best album since Sunbather. And I don't say that lightly because I really love a lot of their other records, but in terms of writing, in terms of sound, it really does kind of feel like this is an album that is jack of all trades and kind of a master of most of them also. Like it really it, all the previous Deafheaven albums to me are defined by a really distinct weakness, which makes it sound more negative than it is with me, but it's like they always have like one aspect that I feel like, oh, this could have been tightened up here, this could have been adjusted here, but no, they hit all of the marks that they needed to here on this record, and frankly, I couldn't be more pleased with it. It's certainly like if it's not my favorite album of the year, it's top three confidently, and I really don't see it being knocked down much further.
All right, I'll start saying what I have to say. And something that I should preface this whole part of this episode with is that I'm dealing with both of these albums with genres that are not my wheelhouse whatsoever. I'm not a huge metal person. We'll talk about Jane Remover, and I'll acknowledge I'm not a huge EDM person. However, I think at this point, I'm able to bring a little bit of a fresh perspective here because I am not a listener that is kind of weighed down by the historicism of Sunbather. That's been an album that I've known about for years and always felt like kind of loomed over my wants to explore this genre. Is like, I know that's one of the things that I need to go and listen to if I really want to get serious about metal, which I gotta be honest, I don't really feel a super hard urge to do anytime soon. But what I want to say about that is that I think me being divorced from the perception of Sunbather is giving me, as a newcomer, a different perspective on this album than most people who discuss it will likely be bringing to the table. And what I want to say, as a layman who's listening to this band for the first time, is that I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I was really impressed with what they're doing here. And it helps that this is a very literary album. It has a kind of triptych structure to it, built around these tracks referred to as incidentals one, two, and three, where you see the writing and the production and the storytelling of these songs move through different emotional spaces, right? I see the first section that goes from incidental one to amethyst as being defined by, displacement and alienation with the expectations of, and a lot of this theme is what I'm getting out of the album's iconography, right? I've been looking at the visualizers, looking at the cover art, but a discontent with like mid-century or even late 20th century American suburbia,
Hmm.
right? When you look at the cover art, when you look at the or not the animations, the visualizers that they did for these songs, there's a warm color palette and all these nice old cars, but all these distorted features, footage that's running backwards, extreme close-ups of mysterious fluids and mysterious men in masks walking around in the background of what would be otherwise very normal kind of blue velvety landscapes.
Oh,
And
good shout there. I picked up a lot of the sort of Lynch kind of dual light world, dark world, camera moving down in the opening shot of Blue Velvet kind of shit.
And I see my favorite stretch of this album from Incidental 2 to Body Behavior as
Mm.
as a straight up rage with all this initial discontent and displacement, right? There's very much a feeling of on Revelator, on Body Behavior, and on Incidental 2 especially, a feeling of like, how could you do this to me? How could you make me feel this way? All the forces that are to blame, whether that's societal expectations that nobody is in control over, that is in the life that surrounds you, or in the people that are like directly confronting you and expecting you to perform the roles that are expected of young white men in this country, that the singer just doesn't fuck with. And the not fucking with it is something that he struggled to come to terms to clearly, and that's something that's being expressed particularly well and particularly furiously in this section of the album. Easily my favorite part is those three tracks, especially Incidental 2, when that fucking like clipping, screeching sound comes in at the end
Mm.
of Jay Matthews' section of the song. Incredible work, incredible stuff. Oh my goodness. And I love the third section. Don't get me wrong. And that moves more in a direction of, um, resignation feels like one way to describe it, but also, finally feeling content or finally feeling like you're able to really wrestle with these feelings, even though they do like their presence disturbs you, but you found a way to continue living and continue pursuing what you have found out you really want to pursue out of life and out of existence on songs like Winona and the closing track, The Marvelous Orange Tree, which I love the video for this track. It made a lot of it
I haven't actually
make
seen
sense
that.
to me. It's a very good music video.
I'll have to check
It's
it
very
out.
simple, but very well executed, and it helps the song a lot because I don't know, for me, when I'm listening to metal albums for the first time, I'm like, I've got the lyric sheet up, I'm flipping through.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't always help it click for me the first time around. So I've been listening to this on loop a lot today, just kind of trying to process how it makes me feel. And more so, the more I listen to it, the more I want to engage with it narratively as opposed to sonically, right? That's where I feel like my
Yeah.
strengths are as a critic, especially in this genre of music. So me trying to get with, the feelings being expressed, how the song is communicating certain emotional spaces is kind of my response to feeling unfamiliar with Deafheaven and unfamiliar with Black gaze in general. But especially in that second and third section, when it gets more into what I think of as conventional, Black gaze, bringing in more of the shoegaze elements that I recognize, that's where I feel more comfortable. And that's where a lot of its ideas resonate with me a lot more. Not to say that I don't love getting kicked in the teeth by Doberman and Magnolia at the
Oh
start of the album either.
man, this is like it's so no frills in that respect, and that it's just like basically a minute into Doberman, the first kind of proper song on here. You know exactly what you're in for in basically the best of possible ways, and I'm glad that you being unfamiliar with metal is that's interesting. I might be making some plans in the future about that. But I'm glad that you kind of that you're at least starting with bands like Deafheaven, because to me they are a perfect way to just sort of like to pivot into the genre basically, just because they have sensibilities that are a little less specific to metal, which again is why all the purists hate them so much. But to me, it's the best opportunity to have like a gateway metal band. And I hope that this album coming out kind of incentivizes maybe a bit of revisionism on those last few albums. Like again, Infinite Grain, it's not my favorite Deafheaven album by any means, but like that thing got slaughtered the moment it came out, and it was just like, why is this just shoegaze with loud drums? And it's like,
That sounds
okay,
like a good idea to me.
I mean, that's the thing, is that if you go back and listen to us talk about it, we're like, yeah, this is based. What the fuck are you complaining about? But I will say that that album to me is kind of the apex of George Clark's writing because he gets into a lot of really like super specific personal shit, like, abuse at the hands of a parental like father figure and stuff. He's unpacking a lot of difficult shit on that album. And on here, I'm glad that you mentioned the sort of thematic angle that this has because like in a lot of respects, it kind of feels like this album and, albums like Sunbather to an extent that they have more in common writing-wise with like the early work of Arcade Fire, where it's like it's all about suburban ennui. It's all about, a kind of coming of age, but a coming of age for people who do it a little bit too late, maybe, perhaps, which is, I guess, maybe why this is resonating with a lot of the lonely online music crowd as it is. But I really have to say I'm very thrilled at how they kind of have no holds barred on this in terms of their palettes. Like their mixing is still so fucking on point.
I think most of it is credited to Justin Melville Johnson.
Okay, Justin Meldal Johnson. Okay, that's another guy I feel like we've heard about a lot. He actually played bass on Deloused in the Comatorium on the song Televators, I think. I just reached into the lowest possible like bits of my hind lizard brain there for that one. You're welcome. But I must say, I think that one thing that also really kind of buoys this is that the ratio of kind of softer, dreamier stuff to hard as nails, metal ass riffs is like basically completely even. Like the songs themselves don't really put themselves in a corner in terms of occupying one of these two modes, really. It's just that the songs themselves are so dynamic and well paced that they kind of ebb and flow, like in terms of energy, in a way that feels like it makes sense for its narrative, like it is evolving. It's kind of like it's an album that you can totally listen to for just vibes, kind of, but it's also an album that deeply rewards you going any further than that, like at all. And respect for them doing that. And I'm glad that this seems to be rapturously received by most people, just because Deafheaven have kind of needed a win for a while now. They kind of even started like Sunbather once like that came out was again it was an album that really divided the metal community, so even their biggest like largest looming project is kind of rooted in them pissing people off and then making a bunch of people basically automatically turn away from them just because of their style. And that's why I respect them as a band so much, is because they could have been making Sunbather 2 and Sunbather 3 this whole time, and they decidedly didn't. And this is the first time it kind of feels like they might be examining older ideas, but they're doing it in a way that, like, the writing to me feels more mature on here. The subject matter is very similar, actually, to stuff that's on Sunbather, but this feels like the protagonist of the story of that album, like, lived 10 years and then decided to go and write about what happened to him in those 10 years. And societally speaking, boy howdy has a lot happened, and boy howdy is there a lot to be upset about. So it's natural that a lot of this consists of very macro problems affecting very micro people. And I very much respect that in a kind of like, it's not punk in aesthetic, but it sure is punk in spirit.
It's punk in its ethos. Yes, absolutely. I know where I stand. This gets a thumbs up from me. Now,
Yeah, this is big thumbs up from Jake. Absolutely.
my album for this week, Jane Remover's Revenge Seekers. I'm going to start this off by just saying I also had an experience with this where this is not my wheelhouse necessarily. I like who I've ended up figuring out are kind of Jane Remover's contemporaries in the past, right? I like that last 100 Gex album a whole lot. I love that last Left at London album and her last EP
Ditto.
as well. She's in a very different genre space than Jane Remover is, but they feel like they come from the same school of musical production as far as like personality goes, and enjoyment of fans. I feel like they have a lot of people that run in kind of their same circles. But this Jane Remover album is kind of my first experience with real straight up digicore. And I had this on in the car with some friends of mine, and I was just like saying in the background, yeah, I'm listening to this for the podcast. I'm just going to put it on. And after a few minutes, one of them just goes, Jen, you don't listen to this kind of music. And I'm like, yeah, I
Damn,
don't.
red for filth.
I was red for filth, but the thing that really clicked with me, and this took me multiple listens to really figure out, and really what ended up being the strongest characteristic of Revenge Seekers for me was Jane as a performer, right? Her vocals, her absolute precision with melodies is what kept me coming back to a lot of these tracks. It's very poppy in its delivery of really, really, really strong hooks and really, really strong choruses, even when they're just like snippets that build up the beat. I'm thinking, especially, for example, the second track, Psycho Boost, which is built on initially a vocal sample from her that kind of ebbs and flows and fluctuates. And so Jane's voice, if you're like me and you're not as into like the EDM rave scene, that can be a thing that can be a really good hook for you if you're into like strong pop hooks, if you're into the more vocalist side of hyperpop. This I would absolutely recommend as being like an apex example of a strong singer-songwriter showcase in this kind of genre space.
So, what you said contextually for your experience with this album, I want you to take that and multiply it by about 90 for me because when I started listening to this, my first point of comparison is I was just kind of like, you know what this reminds me of? Playboy Cardi.
Oh
And that
no.
observation was, like, kicking around in my head, and I was just like, you know, it also it reminds me a little bit more, like, if I hone in on that kind of new, cloudy, kind of rage scene, the album that it really reminded me of was an album from it was it last year? 20 think it was last year. If it wasn't, then it was the year before, but it was one of the newest Yeet albums, 2093, I believe it was called, something to that effect.
Yeah.
Um, which was the moment where I listened to an album and was just like, you know, maybe I do like this music. I just don't like Playboy Cardi when he does it. Because I listened to that album and I really fucking enjoyed it. I was like, this is like 20 minutes too long, and also, why is there a Drake feature on this album? But I was like, you know, this is I'm gonna be more open-minded when I engage with stuff like this from now on because I somewhat notoriously we were a bit this podcast was or a previous podcast was kind of split by Playboy Cardi's Whole Lotta Red in many respects. And my lack of ability to engage with that album and a lot of that sound kind of drove me crazy after hearing it because I was just like, I want to get it. You know, like I pride myself on my ability to expand my horizons no matter like what something is or how challenging it might appear at first. Like I listen to some of the most patently unlistenable fucking music that most people would just be like, yeah, man, this is fucking noise. What are you talking about?
We,
And
we
I'm just
just did a
like,
3 hour video about clipping.
exactly. And one thing that also gave me reticence about this was the fact that we did technically cover the last Jane Remover album on the show, and I didn't really feel much from that. Like, it was pitched to me as kind of like not quite Ethel Cain adjacent, but like spiritually it sort of felt like the spacier, moodier parts of something that would be on Preacher's Daughter, but like really fucking noisy. Just like really kind of ratcheting up the staticky, the crackling kind of nature of it. And there was a lot of shit that I latched onto from a writing perspective, but from a sonic perspective, I was like, this doesn't really have enough dynamism, I guess, to truly grab me. Which, again, yeah, I had reticence, but going into this, I was like, oh, that's not a problem at all because this sounds absolutely fucking nothing like the last album. Like, I was truly like, I saw featuring Danny Brown on the second song here, and I was like, what the fuck are we
How?
do? What? And
We
then,
we just talked about in our all-time rappers video how I thought it was funny that Danny Brown has been doing a lot of music like this. And I want to make a point. What I said in the beginning about my enjoyment of this album is not to say that I don't think the production is absolutely stellar across the board, because it is. But I had to really figure out, like, okay, if I think this sounds good, like, what have I been doing with the rest of this music the whole time? It's like, oh, there are times where I do find some like EDM that I fuck with, that I enjoy, but it's all just kind of noise to me, and it just kind of passes through. The combination of musicality this good in this style, with lyrics and flows and melodies that I fuck with this much, has given me earworms for weeks. Like I
oh
said,
man,
second track, the
Psycho
refrain
Boost.
on the second half of Experimental Skin, just hearing Jane get like more and more like loose and humorous with the "come touch it," like that is enjoyable. Like I love listening to her perform, and that's what makes the process of hearing these beats kind of actively form before me on a lot of these tracks feels so good. Because man, what really got this to stick with me is I loved the Danny Brown feature. I was like, okay, yeah, obviously Danny's gonna
Stellar.
kill this. It's gonna be one of my favorite parts in the album regardless. But what really got me to immediately like really see this through was the start of Experimental Skin,
Oh
with
yeah.
just this crazy like new emo vocal flair to it, where she comes in with these like harsh high reverb. She's got a lot of like vocal manipulation going on, and she doesn't always do this, so she knows when to use it to really accentuate what she's going for on a track. And like I said, Experimental Skin, it's the longest track here, but it's easily one of my favorites. But my favorite though is Professional Vengeance,
Oh
which
yeah.
is basically like a lovesick ballad as a digicore track, and it's amazing.
Oh man, this whole album, like, not only did it hit with me, the moment it ended, I was like, run it back, doing it again. I have to make sure that I liked this as much as I thought I did. And the amazing conclusion I came to is that I did. The appeal of this album is, like, we're talking about it in terms of like all these things it reminds us of, and like in that respect, it could maybe put people off. But I think this is just genuinely super accessible. Like the EDM bent that this has gives it a constant rhythmic forward thrust that just like it's like the exact thing that I needed on her last record to truly get along with what she was doing. But again, that may as well be a project made by a different person, because this doesn't resemble it at all. And not to mention, like, I do still feel like it is like a very chaotically mixed album, but chaotically mixed with very specific intent. Like I really feel like this album does a great job of not letting its distinct singular instrumental ideas like fade into the background of just the overall coalescence of what the song is. Like you're always very keenly aware of just like, oh, the synthesizers are doing this, the drum pattern is this. It's very easy to understand, and even easier to kind of feel, and just sort of fucking like, man, at work I gotta like watch myself occasionally, because I'll just be sitting in like a chair or something. I'll be like, "Are you looking at me? Don't
Feels
look
like
at
you're
me."
pardon me, pardon me. Yeah.
Oh, and again, like you said, the hooks are on point. Like one thing that I got really, really into starting in 2021 was a lot of kind of EDM that like isn't really what people traditionally think EDM is. Like, it's not the 2014 Chainsmokers kind of style of the genre. It's really more of like a blend of like, a more current sort of hyper pop adjacent thing. But like basically this is my long-winded way of saying that I got really fucking into Porter Robinson's music. Nurture may be the best pop album of the decade. And what I discovered that I really fucked with in terms of EDM was stuff that is produced really fucking cleanly, like with a super like crystalline clarity. Like Porter or grimy shit like this. Stuff that just makes you feel like you are at a rave, you are sweating, you are probably intoxicated on multiple substances, and that's all that matters. The entire world disappears when I put on Revenge Seekers, and it becomes nothing but about the fucking beats that knock. And also, the writing on here, I think, is really evocative and, as you mentioned, very humorous. It's not exactly using the humor in place of like substantial songwriting either. I think a lot of the humor on here is kind of an ironic device to sort of obscure a lot of the issues that are being discussed on here, like just the idea of like stagnation, the idea of like a previous version of yourself and wanting to kind of look back on that version and sort of seeing it with maybe rose tinted glasses and like wanting to return to the past, but the inescapable forward thrust of time pushes you further. And like when it's in a specifically queer context, it makes a really interesting commentary about like gender and like transitioning and finding yourself and all of that stuff. But it's not like it's this heavy shit ever. It's just like, oh wow, like I kind of, it's not a bad thing because I think this album is incredible, but I more or less had an issue with the last Black Dresses album because it was like sonically, I was like, this is maybe the most into something that like with them that I've been. But also the emotional content and writing on that album is so fucking ruinous that I can't listen to that record. It's like great shit. I will probably never hear it again because of some select songs on there. This, on the other hand, is all about like acknowledging the darkness, but being like, fuck it, man. Like there is a brazen confidence on display on this album that I just think is so addictive, so much fun. Like this is like my go-to fun blast in the car at full volume shit type of album that I'm mystified to not only how good I think this is, but also to just how I constantly want it to be on. Normally, this is something that would overstimulate the shit out of me, and I would be like, okay, enough of that for like 2 weeks. But man, I have listened to this album at least like once a day since you mentioned it to me, and then like on some days like 2 or 3 times a day because it really is just that easy. It is very much in one mode, and I think that will determine whether or not you as a listener will fully fall in love with this. Is that it very much stays locked into third gear as it barrels forth towards the ending. This is just the kind of album where the sound and the synchronicity of everything, where that works for me. Like that is often a criticism that I will label at many albums, even albums that I like. But if you have a specific goal in mind when you're pursuing a single-minded sound, which is again getting the listener to throw ass, you have succeeded in spades. This is up there with Deafheaven for me as like my like top candidates for best album of the year. Like, and I never in a million years did I think I would say that about a Jane Remover album after that. Like, I know I need to go back and listen to Frailty. I know that Riley really likes that record a lot, and that's on the docket soon, but it also requires me from pulling myself away from Revenge Seekers, which I don't want to do right now.
And I'll say one last thing about this. I want to give a little bit more credibility to, again, the song structure's ability to make these songs feel varied. Because you're right in saying that sonically the album is kind of in one mode, but the actual songwriting and the lyrics give you different kinds of songs. You have, like I said, we start with Twice Removed, which is a bit of an introductory kind of mission statement ballad where, yeah, she is talking a lot about how I kind of almost gave up, but I'm saying fuck it. So don't bother me about this for the rest of the album. Let's just do what I came
This
here to do, which
album's
is have a
thematic
good
core
time.
is very literally "fuck it, we ball," which
Yeah,
I would also like to say this is hands down my favorite album cover of the year so far. You've got a hot goth queer trans woman with a flaming katana, like dressed up in full like Buffy the Vampire Slayer ass regalia. Like flawless,
gnarly,
no notes.
immaculate vibes. And then it ends even, she finds humor in her instability in a lot of ways. Like at the end of the album, making a joke about should I change my name again? Like she has been able to take, and I admire this a lot. She's been able to take clearly a lot of self-doubt that's come maybe out of the last couple of projects or even just the last couple of years of her life and been able to spin it around into like, no, I can exist in flux. I can continue to do what I do while committing to embracing the changes that I want to feel. And this album, to me, feels like I'm watching somebody make a step in the right direction for themselves, which is super inspiring
Absolutely.
to me. It's very inspiring to me as an artist to see somebody so happy with what they ended up making.
Oh, yeah, there is a palpable like, it does discuss difficult concepts, but there is a distinct flavor of queer joy on this album that is just positively fucking infectious. Like, I'm I'm kind of sad that this wasn't quite in my life soon enough to when a bit of real life context here is that Jen recently got their master's degree. Congratulations. I attended their
Thank you.
graduation. And you know what would have made that entire day where we basically did nothing but bar hop afterwards would have made that like even better is if we found a way to drive somewhere like 20 miles out and we got to put this album in the car and blast it at full volume because this is absolutely an album for like getting your friends in the car just being like
Put it on.
it's it is like again it is such a fucking blast to just listen to just throw on and just be like this is like it's really interesting that you talk of like about her attitude, I guess, like specifically in reference to like moving on and stuff, because this sounds like it is the sound of an artist entering flow state and like transcribing what that feels like into an album. And man, that's just like that's heroin to me. Like, bring it on, baby. I want more.
Yeah. All right. Before we move to the main event, let's give a thumbs up, thumbs down on
Two thumbs way
Jane
up, baby.
Removers, Revenge Seekers. And now, on to the main event. We're going to
Oh
start with
boy.
my pick.
Ding ding
We're going to start
ding.
with, we're going to start with my pick, which is the 1972 film by Bill Gunn, Ganja and Hess, which I talked about a little bit in the last recording that we did together, our clipping discography breakdown. But I'll recap um, what this film is about, what it's doing right here. So, this is written and directed by Bill Gunn, who made only a couple of movies. I think he only made one other feature around the same
Hmm.
time that he made this, which I still need to see, called Personal Problems. So, Ganja and Hess, very much a spiritual successor, or maybe even a intent derivation from the burgeoning at the time blaxploitation film movement and the rise of the independent horror film scene in the late 60s with stuff like Night of the Living Dead. There's even a star here that you might recognize from Night of the Living Dead, one Mr. Dwan Jones, who plays the titular Hess Green, who is a doctor and also an avid art collector who has a lot of old African regalia in his mansion. And the film begins very esoterically. We have a credits sequence that is set to a blues track by composer and actor in the film, Sam Wayman. Shout out to him. The first time I ever posted about this movie on Twitter, he got in my replies about it. Very nice guy.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
Legitimately very nice guy. So I know he looks up the name of this movie. Sam, if you're watching this, shout out to you. Love you, man. Uh, but he starts out with his track that it was even the sample for the song Blood of the Fang on the Clipping album, where he kind of gives a very operatic overture of the premise of the film, which is there is a fictional African tribe called the Mirathons who possessed an addiction to blood. And while yes, functionally this is a vampire movie, it's one of those where they don't really use that kind of language. It's always referred to in the terms of an addiction to blood, those terms very carefully used. And how the film gets going, the inciting incident is that Hess's assistant expresses some suicidality at a party one night when they're drinking and having a conversation. He ends up attacking Hess with a ceremonial dagger from the Marathons that passes on the blood obsession to him. So Hess is dealing with his kind of newfound vampirism, these newfound compulsions, and after killing his assistant, his wife, the titular Ganja, arrives and says, "Hey, what the hell's been going on?" They continue to build a relationship, and their relationship kind of drives the rest of the narrative. And this movie is so goddamn expressionistic and wonderful. I love it so much. I want to hand it over to you, Jake, because you're the one who's experiencing this for the first time. What really sticks out about Ganja and Hess to you?
I think it was probably we mentioned this to each other just when talking about recommending each other stuff and the context of like this specifically. But I think the movie that this reminded me the most of is the kind of oft forgotten uh is it wait, yeah, it's Romero. The Romero film independent horror film Martin. For those of
Yes.
you who don't know, Martin is a very, very low budget film from George Romero that is kind of his vampire movie, but in an odd way, it is very like from a guy like Romero, you probably have a certain set of expectations as to what a movie of his will be. And Martin adheres to none of that at all. It is a really slow burn. It is really quiet, really intimate, often kind of surreal, and very much plays with what we know as like vampiric tropes in media and like kind of flipping them on their head. And this very much has a similar vibe, especially it kind of dials up the surreality aspect of everything, which I was like straight up not prepared for at all. I was not prepared for how, again, odd this film comes together in the end, just because, I mean, when you think about a movie this old, it's sort of pushing the form is, again, that's just not what you expect when you come into something like this, and it really, really does. There are aspects of it that are very clearly rough around the edges that result from some production trouble. There are actually two cuts of the film. I've seen the longer one, but I have a
Luckily, that
feeling.
the director's cut is lately the most readily available. I haven't even tried to look for the studio recut, which comes in at like an hour 15 and gets rid
Oh,
of a lot of what
Jesus.
makes this
That, like,
and gets rid
even
of a lot of what makes
imagining,
this special.
like, if anything, this movie needs more scenes, not less. And like there are aspects of it that like initially I think like the opening voiceover, for instance, feels like a result of trouble in editing that maybe had to be put on in post to kind of clarify some aspects of the main character and the narrative, but also kind of like Martin in its inherent shagginess, it also lends itself to have a very intimate quality. Like there is a conversational tone to the dialogue in this film that very much feels like it's almost the only thing in this film that feels tangibly real, which is not a mark against it at all. It's just it is going for a very specific vibe, and frankly, I kind of needed the dialogue to be grounded like that because it sort of allowed me to chart the rough waters that is watching this film, which I'm not sure I could heartily recommend it to just about anybody, even vampire fanatics. But in terms of how I got along with it, I really think this hits its stride very quickly. Like it does have a kind of clumsy opening, in my opinion, but again, once we get past the initial inciting incident and the actual kind of vampiric shenanigans begin, there is so much to dig into with this. Like, truly and honestly, it feels like this screenplay cribbed notes from somebody's manifesto, but not in a I'm talking down very obvious political bold text, nothing to couch it in kind of shit. It's very, very subtle in a lot of ways. There's one line at the very beginning that's basically the thesis statement of the whole movie when a character says he's not a criminal, he's a victim. The line between criminal and victim is precisely what this movie is about. Explicitly with a very heavily, leaning on a racial context of that, but it is a little bit broader in a lot of ways. There is a sense of like tangible darkness to so many elements in this movie, but there's also kind of there are moments where the characters kind of have a reprieve and just kind of get to be themselves untethered from their addiction. And when you get those moments, it's like I just can't imagine a movie from this time period being this forward thinking and also allowing its characters to just kind of exist without being kind of ideologues, which often does happen with older sort of very political capital P cinema. It happens occasionally, a lot of the time with horror. Hell, a lot of the time with Romero. Anybody seen Land of the Dead by chance? Um, that said, there's so much to notice about this movie that really does feel like everybody put their best foot forward. There's like the sort of song that plays like over the credits. It's such a lonely, like sax imbued, like it sounds like the song that Gene Hackman, rest in peace, is playing in the conversation when he's alone in that apartment and he's just sitting there playing his saxophone. That's what it reminds me of. The whole sort of soundtrack has this eerie quality. And the sample actually from the clipping song that we talked about that sort of spurred on this whole discussion of this movie in general, that's used very frequently. I thought that was just going to be like a moment in the movie, but
Oh
like
no,
the
that
that's
might
utilized many many times as like a device to sort of foreshadow something that's going to happen in the immediate next scene. So there's a lot of really tight filmic language that this movie, in all of its wonkiness, does adhere to and does give the viewer enough of. There are also like I just noticed that like there's like in the set design, for example, there is a lot of stuff to notice. Like you can see stuff like there's a Nina Simone record that's playing in like the background of like one of the shots in like the really big house, which I see you. I'm a big Nina Simone fan,
there's
so
like
I
old
that
black
real one.
theory books laying around that you can
Ex-
notice and like establishing shots.
it is very much, and in a lot of ways it's like we didn't even plan this to happen, but it does share a lot of kinship with Sinners in many respects, specifically in how like assimilating into the bourgeoisie, like even if you're down with it, even if you know what's up, assimilation is inherently going to distance you from your community, particularly with marginalized people. And that applies to everybody. And that sort of sense of assimilation is what the film is about. Like becoming more addicted to this is he's kind of usurping the guy he killed's life in every way to the point where he's taking his house, point where he's taking his wife. And then everything around them begins to erode and begins to crumble. Like the first real conversation in the movie revolves kind of an etymological discussion of language and swear words, which is just like really fascinating to listen to. Like the people in this movie always have something on their mind, and they'll always just be like, hey, you know what, and then they'll just start kind of going, and you're just like, I don't know where this came from, but you're kind of spitting. um there are also moments of this where like it's not like an 1,000% serious movie either. There are moments of levity, like the conversation that has like the guy with the noose. It's really fucking like funny, but also like super tense in the same way that like the Thing is tense when he's just like, I need to go back inside, and the noose is just hanging in the background. It's like the
Yeah,
exact
yeah, yeah.
same energy as
It's
that
gallows.
scene.
It's definition gallows humor. You know.
Yes, precisely. It's an interesting idea presented where like the other guy projects or objects to suicide because he'd be implicated, not because the person would be killing themselves. Like
Yeah, it's like if you
those
kill yourself on my fucking land, who do you think their cops are going to come after?
And like again, it's just like even that kind of potentially throwaway line, it's like, oh no, that actually does say something about, your status and about your priorities at this point. And there's like the first murder in this of like the guy, it flashes to a cutaway shot of John Coltrane on one of the albums, I think, on one of the like the vinyls. And I was like, it's really interesting that we pick John Coltrane to show here, who very notoriously, very famously struggled with a powerful heroin addiction, but in many respects is a model of, black exceptionalism. He is, quite frankly, if you don't think he's one of the 10 greatest musicians who's ever existed, you probably don't know all that much about music. And I think the movie constantly sort of has that in the background of like very important black either societal or like celebrity artists, like stuff like that. And it's never like, again, it's never shoved to the forefront. It's always something to notice in the background, which again, that's what really carries a lot of the filmmaking for me, is that there's so much taut intentionality in this movie that like you can be assured that no decision that was made on accident. It's the sign of great directing. But also, if you just want like a weird fucking horror movie, like the fucking death scene, the initial one, like dude is like fucking giallo blood everywhere. Fucking Crayola crayon ass waxy giallo blood, which is awesome. And it's also, I forgot to mention that it is kind of divided into parts, into segments. I can't remember. Did I write down what the first part of it was called? I
The
don't remember
victim.
what the first part of it was
It's
called, but
called Victim.
victim. And then the second part is called survival, which again, it's very much like these keywords very much tell you overridingly what the movie is thematically working towards in terms of the journey of the main character. And like immediately it sort of begins with him stealing like blood by setting fire to a trash can that explodes. That's a part that happens. There's an immediate setting change from the very, again, bourgeoisie coded mansion to a more metropolitan city. And it's like, I think this choice of moving settings is kind of displaying how this kind of behavior, this kind of addiction, or this kind of assimilation is going to affect the root first and then slowly poison its way upward. Again, this movie, in terms of its like thematic machinations, iron grip. It always has a good head on its shoulders, which I really respect. There's this like we see this couple, this black couple, and they're talking about needing money to go to the Derby, and which again, Jen and I are both from Kentucky, so I think that was an odd moment of just like, whoa, huh? People going to derbies here? Where's your hat? Um, but like they immediately try to swindle our lead out of some cash. Like they're clearly a little bit more well off than most people, and like they mention something like the Apollo Theater, which again, that is such a big pivotal location for like an entire half century's worth of black art. I mean, like, the entire reason Lauryn Hill exists is because they tossed her out on that stage and she got booed initially. So again, there's like a lot of ideas about, black excellence that's being portrayed on here that is very fascinating. And like there's there's also like right after this, there's like an initial sex scene. Like he tries to like resist her for a few times until he finally does get stabbed by the boyfriend. And it does such a great job at showing you how much the lead has to fight to not ultimately succumb to the thing that was inflicted upon him. It's like this dude every step of the way is trying not to be what his instincts are driving him towards, and he's doing his best, but at the end of the day he can't override his own programming. It's not there. Nobody has the willpower to resist the supernatural lure.
It also just has some of my favorite imagery in any kind of movie like this. I'm thinking especially about a particular dream sequence where Hess is in like a masquerade garb, like he's got the full suit and tie, and he's got this masquerade mask on. And there's this white guy that's always like staring him down in this like empty
Super eerie.
space that keeps popping up. It's the only time I'll compare something like this to Lynch because it just reminded me of the little guy in the tinfoil with the nose in Fire Walk with Me,
Absolutely.
and like the
Absolutely.
kind of presence that that figure has. But it's very good at using the bodies of others to represent conflicts in our characters. You know, this white guy represents the kind of double consciousness that exists within Hess of, uh, uh, the kind of civility that he's been taught by the society that he lives in, and the auditory and often visual now connection that he has to the motherland that like just keeps disturbing him. That's what that leitmotif with the African girls is all about. That's what seeing the older woman in full tribal garb in the backyard of his house is all about, is this kind of push and pull between the old land that you can't go back to and the new land that you don't belong in but you're stuck in.
A brilliant way of putting it. And like there's also like there again so many tiny little details like the woman that tries to seduce the lead. She's wearing a wig that I will only describe as very white lady coated. And then when she tries to sleep with him, she removes it and shows her natural hair. And it's like there are these little tiny details always popping up here. And then like the it just again, it's fascinating to me how much of again, a taut grasp I think that this movie has on its thematics in a way that never feels burdensome when it totally could. Like again, this is stuff that any lesser screenwriter or director would fumble almost instantly. Like it is an incredibly easy thing to fuck up. But that said, I don't ever think this movie like stumbles. There's another thing that made me think of Martin actually was they do that like I'm pretty sure you've seen the Red Letter Media video about Martin where Jay
Oh yeah, I
talks
love
about
Martin. It's one of my favorite movies.
the razor blade trick that Jay talks about employing where you have like the patch of skin and like they do that in that scene. Like that is totally what they're doing to make it look real, and it actually looks fantastic. But I noticed that trick and I was like, oh yeah, that actually like is in Martin. I've seen that before. And there's like the like immediately after you get like this sort of beat where he kind of hazily recalls what happened and just starts throwing up. And again, there's the white man in the mask looking at him in the hallway, and it's so uncanny, and it has this like mocking laughter that's just so sinister and evil, and it's just like that right there is the core of the movie. That is the evil at the heart of this. That is not the addiction. That is not anything. It is the power structures set in place that laugh at you while you fail. And like there's like an element of cruelty to that I feel like is so genuinely very chilling, but it's so understated that it makes the movie feel like it has this like looming presence over every scene, even though you're not being explicitly shown that something is there. Like there's just such a beautiful grasp on atmosphere here. And then we kind of segue into part three, which is letting go. And I gotta say the initial like the wife of the guy that he killed calls and he says not there, and she's got this line where she just goes, I've had a very fucking difficult 6 months, and I'm like, girl, same man. Like
Ain't that the
I have
truth?
also had a very fucking difficult 6 months, god damn it. That got a genuine laugh out of me. uh but like the wife comes back, she's out of cash, she needs to stay at the house, and it's like he's really beating around the bush, is just being like, oh, like he's gone, just
He's
left.
missing. I don't
And
know.
like you
I
clearly
haven't
get
seen him.
a lot about their relationship because she's just like, oh, okay. Like she just does not give a fuck that her husband is gone. Like you can tell like this is, if anything, like this is a marriage of convenience at its best moments, I'm sure. But her first real conversation is about drug smuggling through the airport, And I'm like, oh God, pre 9/11 cinema, guys. that's that's something you can't put in a movie today. It's and I also have in my notes here is man, Dwan Jones, handsome man. He really I like again his immoral performance in Night of the Living Dead remains eternal. The best thing in a movie full of great things, in my opinion. Here he's asked to shoulder a lot more performance wise, and just like again, this movie is built upon his back, and he carries it. He carries it so well. Like there's there's like the second kind of sex scene in the movie that's lit so well. Like so well. It's just a white bed and this just abyssal black background to the point where I don't even know how they were able to accomplish that set and lighting wise. It's just it looks so incredible. Like it kind of reminded me of like the scenes in Under the Skin where Johansson is like luring the men to their deaths
Yeah.
and it's like that complete fucking black void with the water in the middle and I was just like, there's so much like creative imagery here, even in the non-horror moments like this. It's just really builds the atmosphere. And then like the next morning, they kind of like have this sort of moment where like she asks him for money, and then she also very comedically refuses coffee offered to her and then very enthusiastically starts sipping what's actually in her cup. She's just like, this woman is petty as all hell, and I kind of love it. She's got this very strange energy to her of where she is just done with everyone
When she's like telling
immediately.
off the chauffeur,
She
she's like, "I need you to get eggs." I can't remember the exact line. Three
she is
things.
the
She's just like three things we're talking about.
she is the type of person who would go viral on a social media platform today for being like outlandishly horrible to her Uber driver. Like just the type of person who wealth has alienated their minds to the point where they don't live in the same world as the rest of us real people. Like they treat everybody however they want. They just occupy a different headspace. And there's also like this moment where she remarks on how she likes wearing white and how he likes wearing red. And we get this kind of close up of jam on his fingers that she sticks her finger in and licks. And it's like there's so much imagery in just this one moment where it's just like it's evoking blood, but it's also evoking, whiteness and how, the proximity to these things and our characters and how, their relationship with these concepts. And it's a very elegant little visual metaphor. And even to the point where, like, right before the scene ends, he very pointedly is just like, I don't want grease in my food. And it's just like, Juan, why you got such a problem with that? Do you
Yes,
do
what
you
does
have
that mean?
do you have some internalized feelings, perhaps? And like it's again great details. The woman is just like ungodly rude to the help in the house, like just terrible. And again, it sort of puts you in this position of just being like, ah, this is somebody who was probably normal at one point, and then she married a wealthy man, and now she's fucking woohoo. And she kind of like rummages through the cellar to get the wine that she wants and unknowingly finds a bunch of jars of blood and then the body. And like there's this abrupt cut to the shot of like the dead woman that he just bit and the baby crying and him sitting at like the edge of the bed and the frame it's such a quiet very disturbing moment. You're just kind of like again there's so many images in this movie that just feel like being hit like with a baseball bat unprompted, just completely like, oh. And then you of course get the media, she's just like, I know you killed my husband scene. Waste no time, like there's no build up. She's just like, you killed him, I know you did. And it's like he totally sandbags her and is just like, no, what are you talking? No, I didn't do
What are you
anything.
talking
And then
about?
she's just like, and just kind of storms out. And it's like their reaction to life being lost is so not invested that again, it's just like these people are on a different planet. They don't exist in the same world. And like she doesn't care much, and she starts monologuing in this really interesting scene. She starts monologuing about winters in her childhood, and there's like this part where she talks about a snowball fight. And it becomes really interesting because she says her mother said that someone saw a boy chasing her, and then calls her a slut, even though it was an activity all the children were partaking in. And it's really like this is kind of an effective statement about how out of context and misconstrued observations feed back into sexism and by proxy racism also. She says, I decided that day I was a disease because I felt like one. That's the line that's this movie. That's the line. I felt like a disease, so I became one. And then she wants to take out her hatred on her mother and infect her with that disease. She wanted someone to tell her that they loved her because her mother didn't. She could only tell me I was beautiful, so I loathed my beauty because she found it appealing. Like this is the best scene in the movie to me because like
Yes.
this monologue hits. You're just like this feels like somebody took a real actual story that somebody had about shit and they just stuck it in the middle of this whack ass vampire movie.
And I cannot stress enough. I love this movie. I love this movie. It's fucking weird. Like
Very.
it took me multiple watches to really feel like I could follow everything that is going on thematically because I watched this the first time back in college, on a recommendation from a professor of mine that I did not get it at all.
That's a real that professor's real as fuck though.
He did not like me.
Oh no. Well,
I was
his loss.
I was a little shit back then. But I ended up while revisiting it for this podcast, I was just absolutely taken by every single bit of it. To me, revisiting a movie like this after so many years shows me how much I've grown as a person who
Mhm.
studies film because I love trying to pick apart these images and like figure out what everything means and do all this and that. But more and more so, I just like kind of letting a movie wash over me from time to time.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm able to get that so much with segments like the scenes in the church with Sam
Yes.
Wayman as the priest. Not to say there isn't thematic potential going on there that's worth paying attention to, but
Hmm.
there are so many parts of this movie where there's just such rich imagery and such rich soundscapes that can kind of overwhelm. I'm thinking particularly about the ending, which is just such a bizarre series of images. At this point, we've gone into full surrealism, right?
Oh yeah.
Hess has exited the narrative. It's just Ganja by herself. Ganja has decided that she likes this life, right? She
Oh yeah.
wants
They
to
get married like
live.
almost instantly.
Yeah. Like she wants to live the way that the rich people live, but that comes back to haunt her in a very literal sense, where she sees the man that she killed, the younger man, like running through the field in the backyard of the mansion in the nude. And then he almost like trips or steps over somebody else that they've also killed, and it just cuts. Like as soon
Mm.
as you see both of them in the frame, it cuts back to her reaction, and she's still smiling at it. And there's just so much to read in that reaction to that vision because there's a lot of like abstract visions that definitely aren't happening in a real sense of space. And so by that point, you're kind of adjusted to that. And so you know you probably shouldn't take that image literally, but just seeing a fully basic shot reverse shot approach to it and seeing that reaction to that image after we've had so much time to like sit with it and react to it and feel however we're feeling about that image on our own, the context that her reaction brings to something like that ends the movie on a very, very, very interesting note of like maybe she isn't going to regret any of this. Maybe she likes being the disease, even with the consequences that come with it.
Like there's another really affecting editing choice is that there's the kind of like marriage sort of like exchanging of vows scene, and it's like cross-cutting between that and them dragging a dead body. And that image to me is just so like the establishment of the family unit and death and murder is just like these are concurrent things because what one does will affect the other. And like there's a line exchange too that they're where they're like, do you still think I'm psychotic? And then they answer like, of course. And he's like, that doesn't frighten you? And then he says, everybody's some kind of freak, which is just like it's so close to like, oh, you match my freak. Like it's like I was so close to like just being like, wait, hold on, what?
Well, it's
But
also
like,
just like submitting to delusion, right?
oh
Both of
yeah,
them.
like that's fully what I read the ending as, is that it is sort of them just being like the whole movie is them having to desensitize themselves in order to keep going, because it's just like it is a biological instinct that is inside them that cannot be quelled. They are cursed with it, and this is what has to happen now. It is an incredibly sort of tragic fixation. Like there's like I love the scene where like he feeds on her. Like the
Hmm.
wound gets worse between shots, and there's like the vision of her running away from him, but then it's stopping is such a like, oh, it's like, it puts a nice little bow on what their relationship actually is and what it'll be like, and how to it'll probably like inevitably collapse and fall apart. Like there's the part like or the part where she like it goes into some like minutia of vampire mechanics. Like she goes to a stream at one point and she starts trying to drink it, but like you can tell by the look on her face that it's just like this isn't doing anything for me. Like I need blood. Like this I'm thirsty. Like this is nothing to me right now. Like it's real Pirates of the Caribbean. Every piece of food turns to ash in their mouths. Like concepts that I remember encountering as a child and just being like, that's fucking terrifying, actually, and I will never stop thinking about it. Um, and then there are so many like lines of dialogue in this final kind of third of the movie where they're actually directly referring to dreams, and it sort of just becomes this hazy like you can't tell because they can't tell. Like they are in a dream state because they've induced it unto themselves. It is, they are indulging in, sex and bacchanalia and all that kind of shit. There's also a part where there's a shot of an elevator that lasts a little bit too long, and it's going so slowly. Like it just kind of made me laugh. Like the elevator within the house that's just like, man, it's like the 70s. And like there's the scene that they kind of have like there's a like once they're like turned, there's a freaky ass sex scene in this too. Like
Oh yeah.
just like shit gets hot and heavy, and you're just like, oh, okay, we're doing this now. And there's another line too where like after sort of everything happens, and then she just very kind of plainly but still kind of like naively, I think her performance too is actually like quite outstanding. She's kind of a more elevated character from the like start, but like once she's got a little bit more dynamism to play with, like she's got this line where she's just like, are you always cold? And I'm like, oh, I hate that. I hate thinking about that. That's so awful. Like, and not to mention, like, all those shots of them in like the field are like, they're gorgeous. Like, they legitimately made me think of like Terrence Malick, like Days of Heaven kind of shit. And I was like, wow, this is I mean, just it's so ahead of its fucking time. There's that scene like really close to the ending where like he hallucinates freedom of some kind, and like the sound of someone struggling to breathe or like hyperventilating slowly gets louder and louder as he kind of just progressively loses it. And then it becomes the sound of a baby crying after he collapses, which is like it's almost like could be foreshadowing, but also just, something that indicates like alarm, or like, maybe it's implicating the fact that they would eventually feed on children because they're this far gone. Anything goes. It
Yeah.
kind of reminded me of all things, it reminded me of Robert Eggers' The Witch. The scene
Hmm.
in which the child is possessed by a demon, and it's just this single shot that holds on him as he's just like has this kind of monologue to God and is like clearly out of his mind, like just so far gone, and just kind of collapses and dies. And it's really dry. It's a really flatly shot scene intentionally just because it's emphasizing the bluntness of death. And a lot of the editing choices at the end of this movie really kind of evoke that of just being like scenes that are about motion, that are about fluidity, and then they will be interrupted by a static cut that'll just make you go, whoa, oh shit. It's there's like there's so many shots of her like looking out at him like at the end with like different expressions, and they all kind of morph into one expression at the end, and it's just like you're seeing the edges of who these people are get filed down, and they are becoming a blunt instrument by the it's like you are seeing someone's personhood erode into the point where they are nothing but predators. And like again, that's just such a oh, it's such a chilling fucking like man, even describing like this movie, like I was not fully head over heels with it when I initially watched it, just because so much of it was still churning in my head. But even discussing it with you, my opinion of it is rising as I'm talking about it because it is such a dense, layered, but like also I'm going to say this because I'm pretty sure that this is something that the aforementioned Versus Wolf podcast actually just mentioned. But it was the idea that as I get older, I'm really more interested in the idea of vibes and atmosphere in film. Like, not in the sense that I just like want to not think about things, but in the sense that it's like if you can create atmosphere in your film, it almost doesn't matter if there's a lot of other things in it. Like that's all you need to hook me. And by God, did this hook me. It's like it's got so much to chew on. It's got an atmosphere unlike anything I've ever experienced. Like this deserves a fully fledged restoration, like so badly. Like it's already a great looking film, but I would love to see like a restoration of like a work print or like something that they've got lying around with it. I'm sure that'll never happen just because old movies like this get lost to time way too often unless they're owned by huge fucking corpos. But like, yeah, this was a movie that I was like initially quite stunned by, and I have just not stopped thinking about ever since. Like, it is really weighed heavily on how I think about vampire fiction and just horror in general, and what I look for and value about social commentary in horror films. Because again, like Romero was always really good at that when he wasn't trying explicitly to do that. Like you can read a lot of racial and class implications into a movie like Night of the Living Dead, and they're not exactly intended, but they are there. And there are movies like Ganja and Hess where it's just like this is somebody who knows that the implications are there and they're building upon it in a really smart, really interesting way.
To harken to harken back to our discussion of Midnight Mass, I forgot that the movie more or less ends this way, but it ends with the children's choir singing
Mm-hmm.
the There's a Fountain Filled with Blood hymn. The actual name I can't remember. That's a banger, by the way.
Oh, I'm glad that I have chosen to do a podcast with someone who can describe hymns as bangers, because as someone who grew up in a very Roman Catholic environment, I'm familiar with many of them, and some of them are bangers.
No, it is, but it's just also like a perfect encapsulation of it, where so much of this movie is ultimately about whether or not your connection to spirituality or whatever your understanding of the natural world is, whether that be spirituality more generally, whether that be Christianity, whether that be archaeology, even, because that's what Hess's profession is, right? He's an archaeologist, is where he gets all that stuff. That's how he understands himself as a black man, is
Mm-hmm.
by connecting with these artifacts. But this whole movie is about what societal force do you use to liberate yourself from the rest of the societal forces, and what happens when you encounter something that nothing can save you from, and where in fact those same societal forces will turn on you, right? Hess's knowledge of African tradition haunts his brain
Mhm.
once his kind of switch has been flipped, right? His understanding of African music and dress. Fuck with his brain, right? That's what all those surrealist parts of the movie are about, is him wanting to chase that connection to the past, but knowing that there's no room for him there, just as there is no room for the present. Say in the scene where he goes to the trap house looking for more blood, and just immediately everybody is skeptical of his presence. Nobody wants him to be there, and he doesn't belong. It's a movie about losing any and all sense of belonging to the point where delusion is the only option these characters can submit to feel like they have any kind of sense of place and time.
It's about grasping onto agency at literally all cost. It is it's incredibly compelling in how our characters struggle with such an innate force, like even the idea of like the only way you can connect to culture or the people that you came from inherently being in the past is like the tragedy of itself, in that it's
Yeah.
just like I like there is no way for me to view this other than retroactively, which inherently puts me at a distance. And it's like that's such an awful place to be in. Like imagine feeling both like you have to endure the consequences of how pure people have been treated historically in the present, and you also forcibly are not connected to the original root cause of that in a way that makes you feel like kind of weird. It's like, you know uh, obviously, as to white people, we cannot really attest to the maximal potency of this concept. But I think about shit like being from like my family is like both sides of my family are from not particularly flattering parts of Appalachia, and the idea of like people looking down on that group of people is simultaneously something you have to reckon with, and also be like kind of inherently sort of resentful of. And that it's just like I'm being pigeonholed because of the history of all of this complicated, awful, thorny shit. But like also that's still me. So fucking like shut up, but also fucking like it's
I
just
get
it's
what
a
you're
very
saying,
strange
but you're
place to
talking
be in.
about my people here.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's just like I understand, but also like fuck you, kind of.
No, I mean, you know this. I get ornery when I see people online, like, shit talk red states when natural disasters happen, which shout out to my people in Laurel County. I hope everyone is doing well because holy fuck, we got hit this
Uh,
week.
Honestly,
Um,
like in terms of fucking Kentucky and weather this year, we're getting fucking ravaged, man. The place that I work at just got like flooded, and like it's a huge historical landmark that like has lost untold amount of money because of conditions like that. Like seriously, awful shit. In fact, you know what? I'll put like a fucking donation to a relief fund in the description of this video whenever I upload it, because Lord knows they'll need it. But like when stuff like that pops up, it's just like you get this feeling of like
there's a
you
lot
get
of
stirred inside.
Schadenfreude taken to the suffering of people in places like the ones where we come from
I
by
mean,
internet voices that just
I
all
I
drives me up a wall.
oh, you should have seen you fucking should have seen me when I opened Instagram this morning when I got home from work, and it was an Instagram post of our governor Andy Bashir, one of the six
On
politicians in all of
CNN, is that
existence.
what
I
you're
don't
talking
want to.
about?
Yeah, him on CNN talking about how this these tornadoes have like literally killed people, and how we need help. And then CNN is just like, anyway, we're going to promote Jake Tapper's book, and it's just like, oh God, fucking shut up. I hate you. And like that sort of innate, sort of inherent gut reaction that you feel when your people get shit talked and shit on is like it's very inexplicable, but you'll know what it feels like when it happens to you. And this movie captures what it's like to weaponize that and like you can use that for, you can use that to discover something that can propel you forward, or you can use that to something that can ultimately destroy you. Like your anger at these things is valid and your problems with these systems are valid, but if you play into the oppressor's role, you are going to stay underneath the boot heel. And nobody fucking wants that. Well, I mean, mostly nobody, but everyone not except the people wearing the boots. Analogies.
Yeah. All right, Jake, what is your score out of 5 for Ganja and Hess? No
Uh,
decimals, because fuck you.
we're not doing decimals for our scoring system. We're just putting it out there, and as you know, we're keeping track of points in this, so we're kind of going by the honors system. But never let it be said, I am many things. Dishonest is not one of them, so I will never lowball a rating. I remember after I finished it, I was like, that was an incredibly solid, very fascinating kind of 3-star experience. And then I thought about it a lot, and I was like, maybe like 3.5. And now that I've talked about it, I'm like, not 4. 4 stars, 4 out of 5. Incredible movie. I haven't really stopped thinking about it. In fact, along with the next movie, you could say I've been thinking about vampires an awful fucking lot this past month.
Which leads us to our second round, Jake's pick for this bout. Ryan Coogler's new picture, Sinners, which holy shit, can I just start this off by saying I'm so glad this movie is doing so well.
Miraculous that this thing is cleaning. Like
I
the
don't
fact
even
that
want to
this
say
thing is
I don't even want to
outperforming
say
Marvel movies, like get fucked.
I halfway am resentful of the narrative that this is some kind of miraculous success because every time a movie with a bunch of black people made by a black filmmaker does well at the box office, all the trades act like it's some fucking anomaly when it never is. There's a reason this movie is successful, right? It's got fucking Michael B. Jordan in it. It's from the
Hot
director
star.
of Black Panther, and it's a fucking vampire movie. It's a horror movie. Horror movies always do well if they are any modicum of appealing to a general audience. So this really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone apart from the Marvel competition, which we figured out pretty quickly wouldn't be a thing we would have to worry about this time around.
I,
That
I
being
I'm
said,
not to sidestep what we're talking about at all, but I have to say, there have been a lot of horrible things that have happened this year, but the collective like Marvel Men in Black erasure from people's minds of just like I have to constantly remind people that I know in my waking life that the new Captain America movie did in fact come out. Harrison Ford was in fact in it, and people are just like, oh yeah, fucking whatever. And meanwhile, we are still talking about Sinners. Still, like it is still a hot, but like I mean, the fact that like it's gotten better, like didn't it have the best second weekend returns since Get Out, which was
yes,
the
a
previous
great
benchmark
second
holder?
weekend. I saw it second weekend because I waited to drive to Indianapolis to see it in IMAX at the museum, which was
Oh yeah,
incredible.
that's Can actually, that's where I want to start off with. Just that there's so much to dig into with this movie, but I want to get it right off the bat in that, like, from a technical standpoint, like we went to the theater near us, Lex Live, which is kind of the nicer kind of theater that's near us that, they have IMAX showings of stuff. And oh, holy good God, Jesus. This movie is fucking beautiful. I don't give a flying fuck what you think about horror movies, what you think about vampire fiction, what you think about anything. You need to see this purely for imagistic reasons. Like there are shots in this movie that will leave you slack-jawed, and it is shot and edited in such a way that it just has maximum impact for a big ass screen. Ryan Coogler has always been a guy that has an inherently cinematic eye. I feel like that's been abundantly true since fucking Fruitvale Station, honestly, which is like basically the equivalent of a guy getting out of film school and then doing an independent feature immediately, and that being an incredibly like good, poignant like movie that just kind of it just kind of happened, and then Michael B. Jordan, and then Ryan Coogler goes on to direct the first Creed movie, which in my opinion is the best Rocky movie, and I don't look poorly on the other Rocky movies. I just think Creed is the best one. Um, then we have him doing Black Panther, which of course is this huge, big, gigantic smash hit. And I think one of my favorite things about this is that, like, I go back and watch Black Panther, and I'm like, this is a really good movie. I have issues with it, but they're all issues in that it's just like every movie under the Marvel umbrella is going to have a certain set of issues, and Black Panther is no different. I haven't seen Black Panther 2, which I've kind of been told is a little bit more of an idiosyncratic movie. I still really want to see it, so eventually I will when I decide to give a shit about Marvel movies again. Uh, that said, it's such a like you go back and I watch Black Panther and I'm like the only like real letdown of this movie to me that's not just kind of inherent with the formula is that the action's not very good. It's kind of poorly lit. The CG in it is very inconsistent. Which is weird just because it's like, this is the guy who made Creed, and like the action scenes in that are fucking like the best boxing scenes put the film since Raging Bull. And it's like,
Well, that's,
you know,
second unit, second unit, second unit.
exactly. Like you can tell that Black Panther, for as, loud of a voice as that movie does in fact have, it's still a compromised product. And I think that that is shown no better in Michael B. Jordan's character in that movie, who embodies a very specific kind of black revolutionary spirit in it. And, there's lots of readings on Black Panther that like, kind of go either way with how Michael B. Jordan's character is treated that are, that's not for me to decide where anyone's going to land down on anything. That being said, I love Killmonger in that movie, but I think Stone Cold, my favorite moment in maybe any MCU movie is just Michael B. Jordan's monologue at the very end of this movie. Like, there's a lot of points in this film where, like, especially since Chadwick Boseman passed, where, like, there's lots of ideas about legacy and inheriting mantles and stuff that's just like, oh man, this shit really hits different watching it today. But there's this part where it's like Killmonger is dying, and he tells T'Challa, he's like, bury me in the ocean with my ancestors. And I remember being in the theater and just like full body chills of just like, did they just say that in a Disney movie? Oh my God.
He's
His
great, and not to
entire
cut you off, but I've seen the second movie, and
Mm.
it has its ups and downs in many ways, akin to the first one does. Where I described it at the time as both Black Panther movies kind of having the highest highs and the lowest lows in my mind, where the stuff that annoys me about these movies annoys me particularly in these cases because I find them so interesting and so unique. And so things that I shouldn't blame Coogler for hurt the movie more than they would normally.
and and here's the thing is that I don't like my opinion of Coogler is not affected at all by the fact that, there are compromises you have to make when making a movie that big. That is just not in your control. There is a certain extent, like, I am just utterly fascinated at how much of him he was able to put into that movie, because it's just like that is unmistakably a movie that is made by the same guy who made Creed. It is like 100%. It's just got parts of it where it's just like, there's the Disney showing through right there. But the Killmonger speech, in my opinion, is like, again, that's just the rawest shit in the world. Like, I felt something inside me stir that only like the Guardians movies were able to do to me, and that is because of my excessive daddy issues. This is for an entirely different fucking reason, but it almost feels like they distilled that moment into it, and then it's like you can kind of feel Coogler behind the camera just being kind of like, I wanted like you can kind of feel that like Killmonger sort of feels like the protagonist of his own movie that like got, removed from the overall end product or something. And it's like Sinners is Ryan Coogler's frustration with the machine made manifest. And it's not exactly an accident that the vehicle in which he is sneaking this in is Michael B. Jordan times two. And
To begin our segue, yes, into talking about Sinners, what I want to say, what I want to make sure I point out is that Coogler did do an interview around the time of the movie's release where he basically confessed that this was the first time he made a movie that felt like it was his.
mm-hmm,
Because even all the way back to Fruitvale Station, he was like, "Yeah, that was a little independent movie that I made that I wanted to make, but it was also based on a true story, and I
mm-hmm.
also didn't have a lot of budget, so I was very constrained in a lot of ways." And Creed was
Yeah,
a
same thing.
legacy movie. Black Panther movies are, adaptations of comic books, and I had to follow the expectations of the studio. I'm paraphrasing, so he may not have said some of these things in the explicit terms that I am, but you arrive at Sinners, which feels and is, by his own admission, a fully formed construction of his artistry. And I immediately feel the difference in
Oh,
everything about the way that this movie is made.
it's so I mean, like, I kind of got the vibe from early on, like, just the way that Sinners was pitched as, like, Michael B. Jordan plays twins, and maybe there's vampires, and it's in, the South, like, during, like,
Post World
like,
War
is it?
One.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, huh, this sounds like something that would be canceled immediately because it's just too weird to be made. But Coogler has been shaking hands with the right people for a long time, so they were able to eventually, like, he's got a blank check now because of those Black Panther movies, and, like, God bless them for nothing else. If just for that, then they are a net good to the world of cinema for that alone, and that's not their only virtues. But when we circle back around to this, it's interesting. I did also, like you, I kind of saw this a little bit later than most of my cohorts did, and it was Riley's review for it that made me scratch my head the most. And then I walked out of the movie and immediately knew what they meant. Because Riley's review for this is the first post Kendrick v. Drake movie. And I was like, now what the fuck do you mean by that? Because, like, what, what? That, what, I don't, and then you walk out of the movie and you're like, huh, huh. And look, I'm not saying, like, and again, I know that, like, Coogler and Kendrick are, like, they're pretty tight because I don't know if
I
any of
actually don't
everybody
know
knows
how
this,
tight they are because
but
Coogler did say recently that Kendrick was just like, "Yeah, I'll do it," and they never spoke about it. And then he came back with a whole album
that's
when he was just
that's what
supposed
I
to
was
make
gonna say
one
is that
song.
Kendrick was supposed to do a song and he brought him an album. So it's like, oh, okay. I can kind of, like, maybe we've been paying attention to some things that have been happening on the fringe as of late. But I gotta say, from the outset, Sinners kind of has an uphill battle just because it's an original horror movie. It's a big blockbuster, and it's obviously, like, anytime a new vampire movie comes out, it is it has to carve out its own place in the vampire canon. It has to set itself apart. It has to have its own rules. It has to have its own atmosphere. It has to have its own take in order to distinguish itself. And we also mentioned in the Salem's Lot discussion we had also Robert Eggers' latest movie Nosferatu. And if I can say anything in that, I really enjoyed that film. But the one real problem that I had with Nosferatu, which is probably the reason it's not my least favorite of Eggers' stuff, which it's a great fucking movie. It's not like I genuinely think less of it or anything. But the thing about it that slightly disappointed me is that it's like, it is an incredibly straight-laced adaptation. There's no frills. It's just like, it is like Eggers' penchant for, historical content feels like it applies to this fictional story. And in a lot of respects, there's some more traditional undertones in stories like that show through. It's just like, this is a product of its time in a lot of ways, and it shows a little bit in a movie like Nosferatu. And Sinners is just like, Fuck convention, bro. I don't give a shit. I I mean, no bones about it. I picked this because I wanted to discuss it just because there's a lot to discuss, but also because I fucking loved it. The I think the strongest aspect of it is, at the end of the day, the way it looks. Is that in terms of how this movie captures its vibe, and that's not even from a purely cinematographic standpoint. I mean, how this movie is colored, how the camera moves. I'm talking about the set design. I'm talking about the fucking way that they will color a goddamn sunset as an insert shot. This movie has such a tangible sense of place, and what I love about it is that it takes its fucking time. It takes its first 45 or so minutes to establish you in this little world. And I know that for some people that can hold movies like this back, because sometimes you go to something like this and you kind of just want the, John Carpenter, no bones about it, get to the premise, boom, 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 kind of like really solidly structured kind of thing. And, this isn't the most tightly structured movie because it's got a surprisingly big scope for how small of a movie it actually ends up being. But, like, it moves its pieces in the right places. In a lot of respects, it reminds me of a film that I was a lot hotter on than most people for this exact same reason last year, which is Dev Patel's Monkey Man, which is a movie that, like, everybody was like,
Yes.
oh, this movie's cool, but, like, it should have gotten to the John Wick shit sooner. And I'm like, yeah, but, like, the first hour of this movie is talking about like its own take on like mythos and mythology and like establishing you again in the setting and the characters and whatnot. And it's just like, I value when a movie takes time away from itself to just kind of let the characters breathe. And that's exactly what this does. It very smartly plots itself to the point where you have all of these side characters who are kind of gradually introduced. And it's a little bit tighter than maybe it initially seems it's going to be, just because the premise here is that in the South, we have twins, both of which played by Michael B. Jordan. They are sort of coming back because they worked for Al Capone, a mobster, and they sort of like, they went up north, they made a shit ton of money, and now they're coming back to, you know, help their community, which is interesting for a couple reasons, but I'll circle back to that. But they're basically like, we want to open up a juke joint. And there's a lot of significance with that alone, in that like juke joints, historically speaking, are like seen as, basically havens for black, social gatherings and stuff away from, well, white society, which was incredibly fucking hostile. Shocker. So, they're trying to they're pitching it like they're building a safe haven of sorts. But, they're also really interested in the amount of money they could make, And so we're going through, we're telling everybody we're opening this juke joint tonight. They find a building, they buy it from this like plantation owner, sort of like who has the who owns the building, and that he's just kind of like, I mean, fucking if you got money, I'll take it. And they're like planning it, and they're like, we're gonna have a big opening night. It's gonna be awesome. And like they're going around to their old friends, the old people they know, like, sort of mending their relationships a little bit with some people like that they had abandoned previously. And there's so much good shit in this part of the movie where nothing technically happens. Like, I think the moment I truly fell in love with where Sinners was going is the scene. I cannot remember which Michael B. Jordan twin is named which, so you're gonna forgive me. I'm gonna get it wrong a lot
I got it. I'll help
because
you out.
because their names are Smoke and Stack, which is like, haha, it's very funny, but also like I
Well, they're
kept
the
getting them.
smokestack twins. That's their
Yes,
moniker. You don't fuck with the smokestack twins.
and again, this movie's very funny. And like Michael B. Jordan is just bleeding charisma in this movie. Like I would have to say that I think this maybe dethrones his work in Creed as being the best work I've seen from him to date, because he has to play two distinct characters. Like they have the brothers have a real red oni blue oni dynamic, so to speak, and that one of them is clearly a little bit more passive, more financially minded, and the other one's a little bit more like impulsive, and he's got the more like he's a little bit more of a womanizer. But the moment I fell in love with Sinners is where it's either Smoke or Stack. Basically, they go to sort of talk to slash make amends with someone in the movie who's named Annie, who is played by wonderfully by Wunmi Mosaku,
That's
who I am
Smoke.
not familiar with at all, but she knocks her role out of the park in this movie. Their interaction, where they're just kind of very subtly implying the history of these two characters that they have together, that ultimately devolves into them having a very steamy sex scene, which again also like I like that we are giving it up to some plus sized bodies in movies like this too, which is
Hell yeah.
again not something you see in movies that make hundreds of millions of dollars ever. I was like, and I mean like, and two, she's fine as hell. And she's cool and awesome. She's like she's got this kind of like connection to her culture and like kind of like a like a voodoo thing. Like you can tell that
I
this
was
is
gonna
going to
say, I
come
don't know if
back.
it's explicitly voodoo, but she's got something going on.
Yeah, very smartly not like mentioning like specifically what it is just so nobody gets like too in the weeds with what that could potentially imply, but like we've got that going on. We've got them going around and talking to like there are a couple of like Asian business owners who they invite to come out there with them and just be like, "Hey, we're putting together this little thing. It's kind of hush hush, but like get everybody over here, get the supplies and stuff." And there's a like this really interesting scene where like there's this single take of him like walking through this place, and then eventually like the truck gets robbed and he shoots the guy in the ass, and then he's just like, "Hey, you want to come over later?" After he shoots him in the ass, and he's like, "Eh, fuck it, I
Invites him to
got,
the
got
party.
nothing better to do." And like the basically the way this movie sort of starts spinning its wheels is like it's getting all of the setup out of the way, but like I'm never not totally locked into what is going on. Like it's never perfunctory, it's never overly expository. There's some really good, like hints at foreshadowing here and there, but like this movie very smartly leaves the explicitly vampiric shit to be like at the very end of the first act, to the point where it almost feels like it's not going to be a vampire movie for a while. Like you're just kind of watching this kind of cool historical drama that's going on with these
Yeah, I
cool,
mean,
fun characters.
I was rubbed a little bit the wrong way by this comp at first, but it's grown on me a lot. Where this basically is From Dusk Till Dawn, where the
Yeah, a
first
hundred
act
percent.
is establishing the characters, getting them into a place, and then the vampires show up. This movie doesn't do that as cleanly as From Dusk Till Dawn does, and all the better for it, right? It makes
I
it very clear that
completely
there's
agree.
gonna be something mysterious going on here all throughout the first act, but it does it in spurts, right? It sprinkles that stuff in. But
Hmm.
what I really, really love is that much like the way that I love Salem's Lot, the book, the first act of this movie loves its community as a character that can be mined for drama, right? As we see Smoke and Stack move around and have all these reunions with different characters, their reputation becomes more clear and their
Hmm.
connections to other people and how that informs their reputation also becomes very clear in a way that's going to become very important later, right? Smoke going out of his way to be alone with the people that he wants to reconcile with is
Hmm.
one thing, and Stack like wanting to be out in public and wanting to talk to his ex-girlfriend in front of all of his musician buddies, right? Just the way that they handle the community differently informs a lot about their characters, and also the way that they talk about the business, where the actual procedures of it Smoke wants to keep very hush hush. Like the
Hmm.
people that he's asking to help him only need to know what they need to know. Like, hey, you run the grocery store, you know how to move items. Can you help me get some stuff out here tonight that I'm going to need, that I'm going to want to sell? Because I got some stuff I need to move. Um, Meanwhile, Stack is just going around town talking to the local piano player who's drunk off his ass. Delroy Lindo's so fucking good in this movie, man.
Bro, I
Um,
fucking love Delroy Lindo so much. Anytime he shows up in something, I'm like, oh God, yes, I love this motherfucker.
and so him and his name is Delta Slim are just kind of sitting around in a circle playing their music, and he's shouting like, "Yeah, Delta Slim's gonna be playing at the juke joint tonight. Everybody better be there." And Smoke is just like, "This is strictly business. Like I need what I need out of you. You don't need to know anything else. Don't ask me any more questions."
And even then, Delta Slim, like, he takes some convincing. Like, he has to be lured in with alcohol because his instant reaction is like, "Oh yeah, huh? You wanna make some money off some poor folk? Okay, interesting." And then they give him some whiskey, and it's like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'm listening a little bit more attentively now." But it plants the seed that, like, you know, I follow a lot of critics that on platforms like Letterboxd, so I'm inundated with many film opinions. But one of the more confounding ones I've seen from a critic whose opinions I normally typically very much respect, but had the worst criticism of this film that I have seen, which is, it's called Sinners, but like the main characters don't like do anything bad, and I'm like,
I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh at what people say about these things, but I come on.
it's like, and that's when this works into the whole. It's just like, my brother, this to go back to Riley's comparison, is that it's just like, the two Michael B. Jordans in this scenario are Drake, because they're coming back to essentially exploit their community. The line is very gray. I'll totally admit that, because they have mostly noble intentions. That being said, they are not shy about the fact that they really want to make a lot of fucking money. And
Yeah.
everything else that happens is really kind of a bonus. And it's like, oh, hey, some of the stuff we talked about with Ganja and Hess kind of showcasing here about how assimilation can inherently alienate you from where you come from and change you, not all the ways for the better. And like, I love that the movie very plainly presents this and does not, like, it doesn't hammer this point. It very much just lets you decide how to feel about it. And as somebody who, I'm an adult and can think complicated thoughts about some things, is that, yeah, this is a pretty morally gray set of protagonists that we have here. Is that, sure, on the one hand, they are coming back and enriching and bringing their community together, and it does have, for a little while anyway, some very positive effects. But at the end of the day, capitalism is fucking capitalism, and who's it going to affect first? The people most vulnerable. And as we kind of slowly get that ball rolling, we're getting that kind of from dusk till dawn feeling, and then all of a sudden we get the drop of the vampires who, God damn it, the fucking I'm ashamed to be an Irishman. God damn it, you fucking, you sons of bitches.
Let's talk
Uh
about the character of Remick for a second. Okay, so
yeah.
one thing I want to say before I go any further with this movie is that in a lot of ways, this movie is engaging with a lot of modern politics and movie making, but it is
Mhm.
not engaging with 2025 racial and gender politics. And
No.
some of y'all got it twisted when you were watching this shit.
And like, on the one hand, it's like, it's an understandable, like, place, I guess. Like, I understand where that criticism comes from, but at the same time, if you're making a historical drama, there's historical is half of that title for a reason, and if we sand off some edges, we're probably not doing the things we're talking about. They're like, we don't need any more very, very explicit whitewashing of history. We don't need to do that. Not
Yeah, we
necessarily.
filled our quota with that. But let's talk about the character of Remick, who is our
Mhm.
our lead vampire, who is, yes, an Irish guy. The first time we see him, and I loved this little detail of just about the world building of this,
Mhm.
he's fleeing from a bunch of Choctaw Indians who chased him off their land
Mhm.
and runs into this little cabin that's owned by this man and wife that are in the clan. And as soon as he's in the house, the Choctaw guys like come and knock on the door, and they're trying to be very reasonable, but they're just like, listen, there's a guy in there. He's dangerous. You need to let us have him. And so
Like,
when they're like
he will kill
skeptical
you.
about, yeah, yeah, I don't even think they say it in those terms, but when they're just like, you need to let us have him, he's dangerous. But when they are like refusing, they don't waste any time. They
No.
say, they say this is not our problem anymore, and then they fuck off, and we never see those characters again. And a weaker
Nope.
movie by a weaker screenwriter would have those dudes pull up to the juke joint, but we never see those guys again after that.
Nah, they're just
And it's
like,
such great character writing. It's such a great detail of the setting. That like this was how, I mean, I don't know too much about the history, but I know enough about my Native American studies from my time in school to know there's a very strange sound happening in my living room right now.
oh, oh no, it's Remick. He's
No,
coming.
it's more like a ceramic. There's like a cat bowl that's rolling around on the floor. Um, you don't have to cut that because that was a good joke. But so when you know this is a movie that is very much about community spaces. And so when those Choctaw guys leave, that is because Remick is no longer in their space. He is no
Mm-mm.
longer their problem. If he comes back, they might well fucking deal with it, but he doesn't, and so we don't know. And so once that part of the movie has kind of been abandoned, we see Remick, who's just really interesting because I saw one of my favorite like jokes about this movie that I've seen people posting about is the idea that he's legitimately offended at the idea that he's racist.
I know, it's so fucking funny.
Because I had a completely different reading for this where I did not take that at face value and I
Mhm.
thought it was like a seduction thing
Yeah.
of like, oh no, of course not. Like, of course we're all accepting and da 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 da. But no, I think the naivete is also kind of the point where Remick, as a man out of time and out of place who was displaced by the Troubles in the same way that all these people in the Delta were displaced by the last 50, 60 years of, black life, of the triangular trade, of slave migration, of all that. Remick has faced prejudice, Remick has faced struggle and turned to vampirism. It's spoken about in vague terms and very ambiguous terms. We don't know a lot about his motivation or even the person that did this to him. We know nothing about. But
Mm.
we know that there's something he's kind of running from emotionally, spiritually about his history. Again, something that
It's
connects very well to Ganja and
he's
Hess.
he's a great parallel. Yeah, Ganja and Hess basically in that like I mean, and it's probably not obvious to a lot of people because here in America, we don't really learn a whole lot about Ireland or Irish history or whatnot, but there is a lot of really ugly history over there that
Yeah, like I'm
like
not saying you have to hand it to any particular brand of white person, but man, the Irish went through some shit that they are still working on getting
that
over.
as there's some real generational trauma there that like you do some reading and you're like, oh, I think I understand a lot of why a particular sect of Catholicism is the way that it is because but like there is a lot there to mine in the sense that like there's also like something I didn't know was that the again in like the slave trade and during the troubles there were people who did like intermingle and like people from like Jamaica for instance were like sold in Ireland and people in Ireland were sold back so that there is actually a big like not big but like a not insignificant cultural crossover there that is like again very historically fascinating that I will not unpack but like just so y'all know it is there but like they sort of use that as like it's kind of the wedge that he uses his inherent like he uses his whiteness in a dual pronged way in that he can appeal to the scary racist because he inherently like will be seen as one of them, but he can also weaponize his identity as an oppressed class to identify with anyone who is not that, which he later does ultimately use on somebody like Haley Steinfeld's character, who also kind of has something going on there. Like she's got like one of her grandparents, I think, is said to be black, and that's what like kinda gets her in there, even though everybody's just like, "What's this white lady doing here?" And everybody's just like, okay."
Well, that's the
Um,
thing is that there are some people who have like known Mary forever and love her and see her as part of the
she's part of the
community.
community.
And that is again where my like this movie is not engaging in 2025 racial politics where like they almost do almost do colorism in reverse to that character,
And
where it's
like,
like she's inherently less trustworthy because of what they're trying to establish. But there are people who will advocate for her
oh yeah, like,
at the
and
top of that ladder, and that's why she's allowed in.
it's a very dual issue in the sense that like if you apply the racial politics of today to that particular issue, it's like it only kind of makes sense historically that that kind of inverts in a very ugly way. So like back then, it's like no, that more or less probably would be the case. But like even then, she is still somebody who is like, she's got the best of intentions. She's not being malicious or anything. She just kind of wants to go there to fuck with her ex-boyfriend a little bit. And the I was already super vibing heavy with the movie at this point. Like we get to the secluded location and like, you know, it again, not a surprise that I am a student, a fan of the films of one Mr. John Carpenter, WKU represent. Um, but I love contained thrillers. And one of the films I think that has disappointed me the most that I like visited in like my cinephile phase is John Carpenter's Vampires, because that's
I
a
still need
really
to see
interesting
that.
movie that I would love to unpack one day. But like you watch it and it's like John Carpenter is a dude who like when it comes to the social implications of his movies, he had his head on straight. You don't he had some things to say about Mr. Ronald Reagan in films like They Live. But Vampires is kind of a really, really conservatively coded movie in that it kind of begins with like a lynch mob of vampire hunters that are going after these people in this house. And it's like, there's just some uncomfortable undertones there where I was just kind of like, this is a little disappointing. And it's like Sinners swoops in and manages to correct all of my problems that I had with that and kind of gives me the movie that I would have wanted out of there. And this is the precise moment where it shifts the kind of movie that it is. And the exact scene in which it happens is my favorite scene in the movie. I'm pretty sure it's probably most people's favorite scene in the movie, but like it's basically when you discover, oh, this is also like a stealth musical. Because in the first act of the movie, there's like people who are diegetically performing blues songs that do have like a rhythm to the way that they're shot and edited in the way that, a kind of half and half musical, like All That Jazz would like
Or
sort
like,
of
I
apply
just
these
watched
techniques.
Victor Victoria recently is also a great diegetic musical that I just watched that I've been thinking
And
about.
then we get like it hints about it mostly, and you just kind of get like, oh, this is just kind of like it's spry. There's a lot of rhythm to these scenes, and then you get, oh god, such a beautiful fucking oneer that's just sort of panning around the entire juke joint as everybody's drinking, everybody's having a great time, and then suddenly you start to hear something in the background of this blues performance, and it's like, is that do I hear an 808? Is that a snare? What the fuck? And then the camera switches over and you see fucking the future ghost of Jimi Hendrix ripping on a fucking guitar. And it's like this moment where the characters in the film connect to blues music as like a supernatural force in and of itself that lets them commune with the future of the artistic medium through song. And the camera will pan and there will be like rappers that are performing. There are going to be people that are like they're like contemporary band setups and stuff that are like sort of phantoms that are just sort of put into the scene that the camera will just kind of whisk through, and it's like you're watching 200 years of a very specifically like black oriented art form evolve in front of you with nothing but this one single camera shot. And I'm like, dude, this is the coolest shit I've ever seen. Like it's
It's
like I
so
don't know how he
great.
got the idea to do that, but fuck the balls you gotta have to pull something this weird in a movie like this. Oh man, all respect. It's such a phenomenal fucking sequence.
It inverts a lot of what we've talked about with Ganja and Hess, right? The idea that you're disconnected from history, where blues in this movie is very much in a way that can be good and bad for you as it explores. The blues being a force that connects you with the past and the future in a spiritual sense. And that being a thing that a character we haven't talked about yet, Sammy, is getting in touch with and feeling a push and pull because he's the preacher's boy,
Mhm.
feeling a push and pull with his father who wants him to like get right with God. But like, no, this is the way that Sammy connects with the world around him. And when you see that play out, like we've talked a lot about the details of it, but I really just want to get into how it made me feel, which is like this is not just a moment of absolutely stellar filmmaking, but it's a great political statement about music and about filmmaking as
Mhm.
a way to communicate black politic and black living, not just life, but like being present, being alive, being in
Just
community.
joy in general too.
Yeah.
It's like it's such a great moment of refrain that you just got to get to sit back and enjoy it with the characters. And like that's a synchronicity that you need with your audience in order for them to kind of understand where the movie takes you. And it's kind of elaborated upon in a really smart way because it's like, Jen and we've talked about things like country music and even blues to an extent, a lot on here. And what I love about when the vampires initially kind of show up and start to like try and lure people out of the juke joint because they are adhering to the rule of, you need to be invited in order to like cross a kind of threshold like vampires often are, is that they perform these group of white people, they perform their own blues song. And it's like so very obviously gentrified blues, like, and everybody's just kind of like, oh, I mean, like, white boy's kind of spitting, but like, you're this is okay. Like, and just the way that they're singing it, it's like he's kind of got like a bluegrassy twang to his voice when he does it too. And it's just like, it's a really subtle thing, but you can really tell that the movie is very aware of the fact that there is blues and there is blues. There is a difference.
There's a bit of a better example of like legitimate Irish folk music being a thing that Remick wants to work. That second song that he plays, the Go Lassie Go, that feels much
Oh,
more
God.
akin to the traditional stylings of the place where he comes from, but he also uses that as a fucking weapon against somebody
Yeah.
else, right? He uses that to seduce Mary.
Hmm. And she ultimately comes to their side and ends up being this kind of chink in the armor that allows them to ultimately sink into the subterfuge of the juke joint. And again, another amazing sequence is when they're kind of all outside, and they eventually all kind of coalesce together and engage in this choreographed dance that's like synchronized. It almost looks like a flash mob, and they start singing a song, and just the way that like the rhythm of the scene is edited is just like, it's like it made me think of like Jim Steinman. It made me think of like the really kind of theatrical, almost like Meatloaf-esque, but like also a movie like Streets of Fire, for instance, which is like a gang musical essentially. And like it's got that kind of uproarious vibe to it. It has an energy about it that's just positively, it's so charismatic and so singular that it's so fun, but also like, again, because everybody is doing it because like they're all kind of compelled to, because there's like kind of a hive mind thing going on with the
Yeah,
vampires.
they make it very clear that there's no leader. It's not a I'm trying to think of something I compare it to. I'm just going to dash it. There's no like you have to kill all of them is basically
Mhm.
what it ends up being. If you just kill Remick, you still have to kill everybody that he got to first.
And eventually, like, there's some goings on stirring inside, some like character beats and stuff going on inside the juke joint with all of the various characters, and some drama that's building that ultimately comes to a head when one of the twins is ultimately bitten by Haley Steinfeld in just, I mean, again, there are sequences in this. I haven't really highlighted it yet just because the entirety of the movie is just so like big and full of so much like distinct dynamic energy, but like the horror in it is exceptional. They're just like, this movie knows how to light people in shadows so that you see like just enough of the whites of their eyes in a given shot to make you be
Yes.
like, ugh. But
I mean,
like
I'm sure
the
that was
scene,
I'm sure some of those were digitally touched up, but sometimes they get it with a lot of practical, and it's mwah.
like the scene where Steinfeld actually like goes to town on Michael B. Jordan, and like they're gonna have sex, but then it's some different things happened, and so there's some biting. Um, I will also say another thing that I saw a lot of people talk about in reference to this movie that I had absolutely no idea what they meant going into it, where I was just like, what the fuck are they talking about? Is how this is Ryan Coogler's ode to go down on your women, folks. I mean, like, Jesus Christ,
Ode to
like
Munch.
it's and fucking it is. And you know what? I respect the very kind of like oddly just kind of sex positive sort of take that this vampire movie, a subgenre of horror that can kind of slant conservatively if you skew it in the right ways, but this is a very like this is a movie that feels like it has like it understands that intimacy is just as important as like the joy of the of communal repartee, like everybody getting together and just being themselves. Like sexuality is a part of that, and it doesn't shy away from that. But until it is used as a weapon in order to manipulate one of the twins, and then he is ultimately bitten. And what I love here is that the movie does not pussyfoot. It does not waste time. It's just like, those are vampires. Let's kill them. Like, we're gonna fucking file down stakes. We're gonna get guns. We're gonna get all this shit, and we're gonna fight them.
That's the great thing is that it's immediately believable that Annie knows what to do about this.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's nice because it gets rid of because you're right. So many people go into vampire movies and they have like 70s slasher movie brain where it's like okay or no they have Scream 1 brain where it's like everybody's supposed to know the rules. But no, these people don't know that they're in a vampire movie. Annie is the only one that knows what to do. But that sets up some good tension as well of like she's the one who's able to be like this is what we need to do, and you see any natural resistances that come out of that where like Delta Slim is like, are you sure about this? And there's even one
Mm-hmm.
moment where somebody is just like, but I hate garlic, and they point a gun at her.
It's just like, it's like, motherfucker, eat the garlic. Like, you are going to die. Like, fucking do it.
Is
And
they do
like,
they do the thing blood test scene where they just have everybody eat a lump of garlic.
I love the practicality of that, because it's like the solution to that problem is such a like film goer, like, why didn't the people in the movie fight the monster the way I would do it because I'm super smart? And then Ryan Coogler is a step ahead of you, because it's just like they do immediately. They do the smartest possible thing they could do. They do immediately, and it immediately has ramifications on their decision making process and how to go about it. And somehow this movie sneaks in being an action horror movie in its second half, because the actual throw down, knockdown, drag out fight that happens between everybody in this is metal as fuck.
Seeing the shift to IMAX after the vampires break in, I felt like I was
Oh,
levitating. Oh
oh,
man.
I was on cloud fucking nine. I was just like, oh, we're gonna get some fucking, we're gonna get some blood and guts, and it's gonna be gnarly. And God damn, it is. This is a movie that fully takes advantage of its R rating, and I am very happy, because too many horror movies that get released these days are still cowards. Cowards that hide behind their R rating is just being like, oh yeah, there's maybe one really fucked up scene, but we can't show too much blood. It's just like, no, 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 no. People are going to get decapitated. People are going to get impaled. People are going to get ripped in half. This is just how shit be. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, it's not 1981 anymore. We don't need to worry about the X rating. Uh,
No. And like ultimately everything is kind of playing out, and we do kind of have the micro conflict of the brothers kind of having a difference in ideology, almost, in that like once one of them becomes a vampire, he's trying to tempt them all to just be like, hey, come over to the, like, their argument is very practical at first. Their seduction of them is really more of like an argument of practicality, and it's like, Oh, I see what you're getting at. It's just like it's easier to kind of, go with the flow, live with your mouth closed, and just kind of benefit from the systems that you can benefit from, even if they're not super great. But hey, you got yours, right? And that's kind of the attitude that they're trying to engender. Meanwhile, everybody's just like, fuck that. What were we just doing, man? Like what is this fucking individual last fucking like? No, don't do this. And like you really feel like it was a really distinct choice to have the twin get the specific twin get bit because he was already kind of leaning that way. That was
Oh yeah,
already
yeah, yeah.
something that he was showing a proclivity for.
There's a clever bit of blocking when we first see them, even where when they're kind of posted up together, standing like leaning on the truck, waiting on the white guy to show up to buy the building. You see
Hmm.
Smoke like standing directly in front of the building, but Stack is just a side of it. Like you see the
Yeah.
building on the horizon, and you can see one inside, one outside. That image is the whole movie for those two
Hmm.
characters. Like that's representative
That's
of their entire division.
yeah, the actual shot compositions, it's like not only are they beautiful, they are constantly communicating something to the audience, whether regardless of whether or not it's super obvious or not. And like again, there's lots of like bits of character drama. We find out a little bit more of the unturned Michael B. Jordan twin and kind of his sort of history about how he and Annie were involved, and ultimately she did lose a child. And there's like again the she eventually does like she gets killed pretty instantly, sadly. And like everything's sort of playing out, and like people are dying, blood is being spilled, it's crazy. But like we've got Sammy, who's like barely scraping by. Like this kid is getting in and out of scuffles and just like hopping through windows and being like, "Oh shit, oh fuck, oh god." And like, you know he's going to make it out just because the movie does begin with a little bit of a flash forward and then a flashback to show him. But what I do love is that ultimately it's like Sammy is kind of an observer who is passively kind of taking in all of these conflicts in order to inform a greater perspective that he comes to at the end that sort of is informed by how he's kind of a vessel for what blues music is and what it has the potential to do, the potential to unite, the potential to divide. And ultimately, it's really comes to a head where, the vampire leader, he gets him out in the middle of like the lake. And one of the coolest things in the
He's
movie
got a nice
happens where
Jack
he has
Nicholson
this.
voice when he jumps through the window and he's like, Sammy!
Oh god, that another thing is that there are performances in this movie that are not afraid to ham it up. Like they are silly ass vampires and they're going to be frightening, but they're also going to be silly. And frankly, you need to embrace that. Like you're having people jump up 2 stories and like leap forward and like
Just the
you
like
got to be a little
half a
dumb with it.
just the like half a second where you see someone start to fly and then it cuts.
Dude, oh that edit,
The
that
whole
fucking
theater went
that
crazy for that.
that was like the best moments in the Salem's Lot movie were exactly like that, where it was just like where the editing would pull something that was like really unexpected and then it would just sort of like sucker punch you like that. And this movie's full of that shit. And at the very end, we have sort of our not just our like protagonist, our audience vessel, but like our sort of protagonist in the form of Sammy. He's confronted with the vampire leader, and ultimately the way he kills him is by smashing his fucking head in with his guitar that has one of those like little steel kind of like circles behind the strings, and it just lodges itself into his fucking head. And it's so sick. It's so sick. And
It's
it's
so
like, oh,
great.
I see what we're doing here. It's like this is, it's kind of commenting on Sammy's agency and where he's going to take his talent and how he's probably not going to use it to, for more financial incentive like the brothers were, because at the end of the day, no matter how good their intentions were, they still kind of came back, and their ultimate goal was not unification. Their ultimate goal was not to serve the community, it was to serve themselves. And once you have Sammy kind of like witnessing that and learning that, he gets away safely. But the movie does not end there,
We have a
because
secret
this
fourth act.
this movie, like I was having a ball. It was utterly fantastic. I was prepared to walk away and just be like, this is a great little movie. This will probably be the one to beat for me this year so far. And then at the very fucking end, it pulls some shit. And I was like, oh, this got me. Like, oh man, ooh, woof,
So
ow,
the
okay.
morning after, Smoke, who's still alive, but told Sammy to go, like to go, and he'll stay behind and make sure he gets them all. He's got them all.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's the morning after. He's still there. He isn't really sure what to do, but he's just chilling. And then a bunch of fucking Klansmen roll up, who Remick did warn them about,
Mm-hmm.
which is an
We
interesting
thought it
thing.
was a red herring because he was just like, oh, the clan guys over there, and you're just kind of like, oh, you're trying to fuck with them, but it's like, no, 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 they were real, they were very
Yeah,
real.
which adds that wrinkle to Remick of like, is he moving about this with the best intentions, even though he has to kind of do a shitty thing to do it, the same way that like Hess does.
Precisely.
Um, but what ends up happening is that he just pulls out, because Smoke is a soldier at the end of the day. He just pulls out a Tommy gun, and we just get like a 5 minute long. We
Just
just get a
fucking
5 minute long shootout with a bunch of clan members.
And I don't really think I need to explain why seeing a bunch of white supremacists torn apart by gunfire is really nice to see right now. I will remember it and think about it a lot in the next few years. So there's
But
that. But that's not the best part.
Smoke does die, and in his last breaths, he, again in a similar evocation of past, present, and future in the way that Gunn is able to with his kind of surrealist imagery, dies with a vision of himself and their, or of Annie and their child in some kind of afterlife that he may or may not be going towards, but it is what he is seeing, and it's a really meaningful image. And yeah, watching Ganja and Hess
Beautiful.
again just made that image more significant to me. But we get and this is what really elevated this to like Killers of the Flower Moon level important cinema for this decade, not just because it evokes it structurally, but because it's just that damn good at what it's trying to do, is a kind of post-credits scene coda with an older Sammy, now played by Buddy Guy,
God.
in the 90s, or maybe not the 90s, but the two characters come in with a very like 90s, 2000s look on that's very nice to see. And so it's decades later, Sammy has become a respected but maybe not super popular blues musician.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear. He's got some plaques, but he's playing in this club, and he's done his show, and Stack and Mary come in, and they sit down at the bar, and Sammy's just like, what are you guys doing here? And Stack explains there's a kind of final twist that Smoke agreed to let them go on the behalf that they would let Sammy go, right? A life for a life, as he
Mm-hmm.
had him where he wanted him and then let him go.
Yep.
Or Mary got away. Stack had to be let go. But they found each other. They reunite. They've spent the decades traveling together, but they come back to find Sammy, and they have this kind of reconciliation where it was like, yeah, that day put me in touch with what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, even amidst all the suffering that I saw and all that I lost. And he has this reconciliation with Stack where it's like, yeah, I've lived a long, long life. And, it's the classic, like, vampire ultimately comes to regret everything that they lost when they were
Mm-hmm.
human. But it was like, yeah, and I've never stopped thinking about the last line of that fucking scene. Where it was just like, yeah, that was the only time we were ever like free, was in the hours we were trying to make this happen before we failed, or
Oh.
before somebody came to fuck it up for us.
It's such a brilliant little coda. It's so emotionally satisfying and just ties the bow around everything. And like, it's like this little part here, it's the same thing as like Ganja and Hess evoking images of people like John Coltrane, where it's just kind of using those real life similarities to kind of insist the historical and artistic importance into itself. That's really like, it adds this very specific edge of just like, it's something that made me think of like I don't know, maybe like if Beale Street could talk. It's like it's almost like play-esque in a way. It's like, or theater-esque is the word that I'm looking for. In a way, it would be sort of the epilogue in something like that that I would totally be able to see working in a different medium like that. But like it's just it's such a it makes this world feel like it extends beyond the borders of just a juke joint. It's like it's able to, like, because of the very beginning and the very end taking place in so like much of the environment, you really do feel like this is a, in a macro sense, we are looking at the entirety of America just through very, very specific lenses.
Yeah. And God, I'm going to be thinking about this movie for years. I really, really think
Oh,
this is like
for sure.
this is one to study. This is one to write about for a long, long time. And I'm so glad we have a movie from a guy like Coogler that I can really unabashedly say that about. Like he's made what will get him in the textbook one of these days.
Oh, for sure. Like he is already in, like, with one movie, he is now in the American horror canon. Like he basically just catapulted himself into being compared to Jordan Peele, which is not a fucking easy task. Like no, like nobody is doing that right now. Like the only people you can compare to Jordan Peele are people who've been working in the industry for like 40 to 50 years, because even they struggle to get the kind of success that he's getting. And like again, it's so awesome that we're getting weird original movies like this, and that, like, you know we follow lots of artistic mediums, we follow lots of new shit, and it's often we encounter something where, like, Midnight Mass, for instance, something that we hold in incredibly high esteem, and it's like not a lot of people watched that, and not that a lot of people necessarily should have. It's not for everyone, but at the same time, it sucks having to go through, like, witnessing all this stuff and continually seeing it being underrated or underappreciated, where it's just like, no, Sinners is, if anything, getting exactly what it deserves in its rapturous success. Like, it just doesn't happen that often that an original, like, capital O original movie is able to captivate people like this. Like, you simply, like, audiences are so fractured, and expectations for films these days is so weird, and we're still so franchise and IP driven that it's just like, this is the breath of fresh air that, like, everyone collectively needed. Like, we have been waiting for Sinners to happen for like years. We just didn't realize it.
Yeah. This is a movie that I was really excited for, but exceeded my
Delivered.
expectations. I'm ready to give my score,
Yes,
and
I'm too.
it and Sinners gets 5.
I could be a little shit here,
Well, my
and I
score is the
could.
one that matters because you recommended that.
That's true. But that being said, I could still lowball here and just be like, oh, I don't, maybe not the full five. No, 5 stars. I won't pussyfoot around it. This is completely deserving of it. It is like, I haven't seen a ton of new movies this year, but it is number one right now, and I mean,
It's
maybe
steep
something will knock it down.
competition.
Yeah, I mean, like, I I'm sure there'll be a couple of movies that are decent, but like the gap between one and two this year is quite vast. So I'm here's hoping, but honestly, if this is the best movie I see all year, okay,
All
sure.
right, so we're gonna put the score on the screen now. The total scores.
Episode one.
I've got 4. Jake's got 5. We'll update these every episode so you all will see the total as we move through our little competition. The last thing we're going to do before we end the episode is recommend what we're going to do next time. Since I led with my thing that I recommended you, Jake, what do you want to recommend me for our mutually assured destruction round where will be both throwing bad things at each other?
It's punishment time!
Well, I've had to put a lot of thought into this, because we're establishing our podcast dynamic. This is the early days, so we gotta come out swinging. And I think the nature
Establish our
of the show,
characters here.
yeah, yeah, we've gotta come out the gate, because this is a show that at the end of the day is mostly about passion. That's why we're doing the good and bad alternating format to begin with. So I've got to come at it with full force, you know, but at the same time, you know, I don't want to break out a nuke this early. I don't want to I don't want to damage my friend so soon or so quickly so that it might de-incentivize you. So, you know, I took it upon myself to be merciful. Benevolent even, you might say, in that my bad recommendation is going to come with homework. Multiple things, actually.
Oh no.
But the kicker is very short things. Not super difficult, because even though I'm recommending a horrible god awful piece of shit, I am attaching it to one of my favorite things in the world because I want to get the whole scope here. Jen, my recommendation for you is James O. Barr's graphic novel, The Crow. My favorite graphic novel. Alongside the 2024 film The Crow, starring Bill
Oh my
Skarsgård
God.
and FKA Twigs. And as an optional exercise, the 1994 Alex Proyas adaptation, The Crow, which you can choose to view or not view because that's not entirely what I want to talk about, but if we choose to, we may.
I'll just respond and say that I've seen that, and I will say my feelings on it for the actual segment.
Perfect. So
I'm sure I'll watch it again in advance, but I have seen it.
So I feel like it was quite good of me to recommend. If I'm gonna recommend something, I'd give a 1. I may as well throw in something that I'd give a 10 with. So there you go.
I appreciate that. Honestly, I think that's a very nice gesture. Now, my machinations are well known to the Jams and Tea podcasts. I've
Jen, do you have
recommended
notions?
I've recommended some crap albums for the excuse of I like seeing you all
Oh Jesus, I have a
suffer
feeling I know where this is headed already.
for the arts of a good podcast episode. And do you remember the first time I was on the Jams and Tea podcast?
I
Why I
do. It
was
was for
there?
Walker Hayes's Country Stuff, the album. Is that
Yes,
it?
we reviewed together Country Stuff, the album, and I hope I never see Morgan that upset with me again ever in my
Oh
life.
Jesus.
That being said, my recommendation is going to be something similar, although coming from a very different place, surrounding some trends in the genre that we have known to discuss before that I would love to discuss again. My recommendation for you is I'm the Problem, the new album from one Mr. Morgan Wallen.
I knew it. I fucking knew it. God damn it.
You were crossing your fingers hoping that it would be or it wouldn't be?
No, I was just like I remember what the last Morgan Wallen album I listened to took out of me for the Jams and Tea podcast. And I remember at the very end, I was like, I'm never listening to any of this bullshit ever again. So
Well, we're going to do it together, my friend, for our mutually assured destruction. Next round of Jen and Jake's bizarre Affray, which I don't think we said the actual title
that's
up until
true.
this point. You referred to it as a bizarre adventure, and I didn't want to cut you off.
That's
That is
fair.
not the title.
It's the Jen and Jake's Bizarre Affray, and we have to change the title purely because if we keep it as adventure, then it's going to set the sword of Damocles over when are you going to talk about JoJo? And it's like, I don't know anything about JoJo. Leave me alone.
I don't either. That's the joke of it, is that neither of us know anything about JoJo, but we just think that that's too good of a title to pass up.
Basically. So look forward to 2 weeks from now where we will be discussing the newest slop from Morgan Wallen and the Crow franchise. Oh God, the Crow franchise makes me want to fucking dry heave. Ugh.
an adaptation of The Crow, primarily.
Yeah, mostly.
But I'm gonna do my homework. I'm gonna actually get the graphic novel and read it because I know it's not very long.
Not very long, but I would advise carving out a solid entire afternoon to process that because it is a lot.
Heard. Next time on Jen and Jake's Bizarre Affray, a foray into the world of the Crow, and a witness statement at Morgan Wallen's latest trial.